Hello, beautiful soul. I'm Aurora, and welcome to Twin Flame Journey, a space where we explore the deeper meaning behind soul connections, divine timing, and the path that leads two hearts back to union. If you've been feeling the signs, you're in the right place.
What is the feminine energy shift that changes him forever? Is it when she loves him harder? Is it when she explains the connection one more time? Is it when she proves that her heart is loyal, patient, and willing to wait? No. The shift that changes him forever is not when she gives more. It is when she comes home to herself. Because for a long time, she may have been pouring her energy into him, trying to understand his silence, trying to soften his fear, trying to keep the connection alive, trying to show him the love he could not yet fully receive. And maybe he felt it. Maybe he felt her warmth. Maybe he felt her patience. Maybe he felt her belief in him. Maybe he felt the way her energy reached through his walls and touched the hidden places he tried to protect. But as long as her energy was chasing, he could stay passive. As long as she kept overgiving, he could keep avoiding. As long as she kept explaining, he did not have to find his own truth. As long as she kept reaching, he did not have to feel the full weight of his own distance. Then something changes. She stops leaking her power into the silence. She stops making his uncertainty the center of her emotional world. She stops confusing devotion with self-abandonment. She stops asking, "How do I get him to choose me?" and starts asking, "Why have I not been choosing myself?" That is the shift. And he feels it. Not because she becomes cold. Not because she stops loving. Not because she turns her heart into stone. He feels it because her energy is no longer available to the old pattern. She becomes grounded. She becomes quieter. She becomes clearer. She becomes softer in herself, but stronger in her boundaries. She becomes a woman who no longer chases love. She embodies it. And that changes everything. Because the divine masculine can no longer meet the old version of her. He can no longer rely on her overgiving. He can no longer hide inside her patience. He can no longer receive her warmth without being asked, energetically, to rise into his own truth. So what happens when feminine energy stops chasing and starts radiating? What happens when her softness becomes rooted in self-respect? What happens when her love no longer begs to be chosen, but simply stands in its own worth? That is when he is forced to see her differently. Not as the woman who waited, but as the woman who awakened. And the moment she awakens into her own energy, he may never see her the same way again. Chapter 1. The shift from chasing to receiving. There comes a moment when the feminine energy stops chasing and starts receiving. That is where this journey begins. Because for a long time, she may have believed that love required movement toward him. More effort, more explanation, more patience, more understanding, more emotional labor, more reaching into the silence, hoping that if she loved clearly enough, gently enough, deeply enough, he would finally feel safe enough to meet her. She may have believed that if she stopped reaching, the connection would disappear. She may have believed that if she stopped giving, he would forget her. She may have believed that if she stopped proving her heart, he would never understand how real her love was. So she chased. Not always with her feet. Sometimes with her thoughts. Sometimes with her energy. Sometimes with her anxiety. Sometimes with her waiting. Sometimes with the invisible hope that kept circling back to him even when her body was exhausted. This is the kind of chasing that no one else may see. She may look calm on the outside, but inside, her energy is running. Running toward his silence. Running toward his potential. Running toward the version of him she can feel beneath the fear. Running toward the message that has not arrived. Running toward the clarity he has not given. Running toward the love she believes is hidden behind his distance. And this is where the feminine begins losing herself. Not because her love is wrong. Not because her intuition is false. Not because she is weak. But because her energy has left her own center and started orbiting around someone else's readiness. That is what chasing does. It pulls her out of her body. It pulls her out of her peace. It pulls her out of her own life. It pulls her into analysis, waiting, hoping, decoding, and emotional overextension. She begins asking, what is he feeling? Why is he silent? Will he come back? Did he mean what he said? Does he miss me? Is he awakening? Is this connection still alive? And slowly, without realizing it, her inner world becomes organized around him. His movement becomes her relief. His silence becomes her anxiety. His attention becomes her proof. His distance becomes her wound. And that is not feminine power. That is feminine energy in pursuit. The feminine was never meant to chase love until she becomes empty. She was meant to receive love from a place of fullness. But receiving is not passive weakness. Receiving is not sitting around waiting for someone to choose her. Receiving is not pretending she has no needs, no standards, no voice, no boundaries. Receiving is the sacred posture of a woman who is rooted in her worth. A woman who knows she does not have to run after what is aligned with her. A woman who knows her softness is precious. A woman who knows her love is powerful, but not meant to be poured endlessly into a space where it is not being met. That is the shift. From chasing to receiving. From reaching outward to returning inward. From trying to earn love to remembering she is already worthy of love. From asking, how do I get him to come closer? To asking, where have I abandoned myself by chasing someone who is not meeting me? That question is the beginning of transformation. Because the feminine energy shift that changes him forever is not first about him. It is about her. It changes her first. It changes the way she breathes. The way she waits. The way she loves. The way she gives. The way she decides what kind of love she is available to receive. Before the shift, her energy may say, please understand me. Please choose me. Please see what I feel. Please do not forget this connection. Please become the man I can feel beneath the mask. But after the shift, her energy says something different. I understand myself. I choose myself. I see my own worth. I do not need to prove what is sacred. I am no longer available to chase the potential of a man who is not meeting me in truth. This is not coldness. This is awakening. Because when she shifts from chasing to receiving, she does not shut down her heart. She does not become bitter. She does not turn love into punishment. She does not use silence as a weapon. She simply stops leaking her energy into a dynamic that has been draining her. She gathers herself. She calls her energy back from his silence. Back from his confusion. Back from his unread messages. Back from the fantasy of who he might become. Back from the future conversation she keeps imagining. Back from the version of him that exists in potential, but has not yet become present in reality. And when that energy returns to her, something sacred happens. She begins to feel herself again. At first, it may feel strange. Because when a woman has spent so much time chasing, receiving can feel unfamiliar. Peace can feel empty. Stillness can feel like withdrawal. Not reaching can feel like losing control. Not explaining can feel like letting the connection die. But slowly, her nervous system begins to understand. This is not loss. This is rest. This is not giving up. This is returning. This is not the end of love. This is the end of abandoning myself in the name of love. That realization is powerful. Because she begins to see that chasing was not only about him. It was also about the part of her that feared being unchosen. The part of her that believed she had to prove her value through devotion. The part of her that thought love must be earned through endurance, patience, and emotional sacrifice. And now, that part begins to heal. She begins to ask, why did I believe I had to chase to be loved? Why did I think my softness needed to be proven? Why did I keep giving to someone who was not clearly receiving me with care? Why did I make his unreadiness more important than my own peace? These questions bring her home. And the moment she starts coming home to herself, her energy changes. He feels it. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not consciously. But he feels the shift. Because the energy that once moved toward him is no longer reaching in the same way. The emotional field that once wrapped around his avoidance begins to loosen. The warmth that once poured into the silence begins returning to its source. And now, he can no longer relate to her through the old pattern. He can no longer simply stay distant while her energy keeps coming forward. He can no longer remain passive while her devotion carries the connection. He can no longer rely on her chase to keep him from feeling the emptiness of his own absence. This is why the shift from chasing to receiving changes the dynamic so deeply. Because chasing creates an imbalance where he can stay hidden. Receiving creates a mirror where he must decide whether he will step forward. When she is chasing, he may feel wanted without having to become vulnerable. He may feel important without having to become responsible. He may feel her emotional availability without having to offer his own. He may feel the connection through her effort while avoiding the truth of his own feelings. But when she receives, the field changes. She is no longer pushing energy toward him. She is no longer convincing him. She is no longer over-explaining the connection. She is no longer making herself emotionally available to ambiguity. She becomes still, but not empty. She becomes quiet, but not powerless. She becomes open, but no longer overextended. And this new energy is magnetic because it is centered. That is what many people misunderstand about feminine energy. They think feminine energy is about doing more to be loved, being softer, being more patient, being more forgiving, being more understanding, being more available. But true feminine energy is not endless emotional labor. True feminine energy is fullness. It is the radiance that comes from a woman who is connected to herself. It is the softness that is protected by boundaries. It is the openness that is guided by discernment. It is the warmth that is offered where it can be honored. A woman in true feminine receiving does not chase because she trusts her worth. She does not beg because she knows love cannot be forced. She does not over-explain because she understands that what is real does not need to be constantly proven to someone committed to avoiding it. She does not wait in pain because she knows patience without self-respect becomes suffering. That is the energy that changes him. Because now he is not meeting her anxiety. He is meeting her alignment. And alignment is powerful. Alignment says, I am available for truth. I am available for reciprocity. I am available for love that can meet me. I am not available for confusion, emotional crumbs, or endless silence. This is not an ultimatum. It is an energetic standard. And the divine masculine can feel when that standard becomes real. He may feel that she is no longer negotiating with absence. He may feel that she is no longer trying to prove herself. He may feel that she still has love, but that love is no longer separated from her self-respect. He may feel that if he wants to come closer, he cannot come closer to the old version of her. The old version who chased is fading. The new version is receiving. And receiving does not mean she is waiting helplessly. It means she is allowing life to meet her while she remains rooted in herself. She receives her own breath, her own peace, her own intuition, her own joy, her own creativity, her own body, her own sense of worth. She starts receiving from life again, not only from the possibility of him. That is a major shift, because chasing narrows her world to one man's movement. Receiving opens her world back to her own soul. Suddenly, she remembers the things that nourish her. She remembers her purpose, her friendships, her beauty, her rituals, her dreams, her laughter, her body, her spiritual connection that does not depend on decoding his silence. She becomes available to herself again. And this makes her energy richer, more grounded, more alive, less desperate, less fragmented, less attached to proving what she feels. She is no longer asking him to become the source of her peace. She becomes the keeper of her own peace. And when a woman becomes the keeper of her own peace, she no longer loves from lack. She loves from overflow. That is what receiving means. It means she lets herself be nourished. It means she stops pouring from an empty cup and calling it devotion. It means she understands that her love is most powerful when it comes from fullness, not depletion. And if he is connected to her soul, he will feel this fullness. He will feel that she is no longer sending anxious energy into the connection. He will feel that she is no longer chasing his validation. He will feel that her presence has become calmer, stronger, more sovereign. He will feel that she is not trying to pull him anymore. And sometimes, that is exactly what makes him look inward. Because when she stops pulling, he has to feel whether he wants to move. When she stops proving, he has to feel whether he recognizes her value. When she stops chasing, he has to feel whether the connection lives inside him too. That is the mirror. Her receiving creates space for his truth to rise. Not because she manipulates him, but because she stops occupying all the space with her effort. She leaves room. Room for him to feel. Room for him to choose. Room for him to realize that the connection cannot be carried by her alone. Room for him to meet his own masculine responsibility. This is why the feminine shift from chasing to receiving changes him forever if he is ready. It shows him a woman who no longer needs to convince him. A woman who no longer bends her worth around his uncertainty. A woman who no longer treats his silence as a challenge to overcome. A woman who has reclaimed the energy he once felt reaching toward him. And when he feels that, he may begin to realize what he took for granted. Not because she is trying to make him regret, but because her self-return reveals the imbalance. He may ask, why does her stillness feel so different? Why do I feel her more when she is no longer chasing? Why does her peace make me aware of my own avoidance? Why does her self-respect make me question the way I have been showing up? These questions can begin his awakening. Because her receiving does not chase him. It reflects him. It reflects whether he is ready to meet love without being pursued into it. It reflects whether he can step forward without being pulled. It reflects whether he can honor a woman whose energy is no longer available for imbalance. And if he cannot, then her receiving still protects her. That is the beauty. This shift is not dependent on his response. She does not shift into receiving, so he will finally change. She shifts because she has changed. She shifts because she has realized that love should not require her to leave herself. She shifts because her soul is calling her back into wholeness. And if he awakens, that is his path. If he does not, she is still home. That is true feminine power. Not needing the outcome to validate the choice. Not needing his awakening to prove her worth. Not needing his recognition to confirm that her energy is sacred. She knows. And because she knows, she stops chasing. She begins receiving. Receiving clarity from the present moment. Receiving wisdom from her body. Receiving love from herself. Receiving life beyond the waiting. Receiving the truth that what is meant for her will not require her to abandon herself to be chosen. This is where Chapter 1 finds its deeper message. The shift from chasing to receiving is the first feminine energy shift that changes everything because it ends the old pattern inside her. Before it changes him, it changes her relationship with herself. She stops using her love as pursuit. She stops making his readiness her emotional home. She stops asking her heart to keep stretching towards someone who is not meeting her with equal presence. And in that return, she becomes magnetic again. Not because she is performing magnetism, but because she is no longer leaking power. Her energy is gathered. Her heart is still open, but no longer unprotected. Her softness remains, but now it has boundaries. Her love remains, but now it includes herself. That is the feminine energy shift that changes him forever. Because he can no longer experience her as the woman who chases. He now feels the woman who receives. The woman who is rooted. The woman who knows. The woman who does not need to run after love because she has become love in her own body. And whether he rises or not, she has already begun the most important transformation. She has stopped leaving herself. And that is where her power returns. That is where her peace returns. That is where her true feminine energy begins to radiate. And that is where Chapter 1 leaves us. With the understanding that the first shift is not about doing more. It is about coming home. It is the shift from anxious pursuit to grounded receiving, from overgiving to self-respect, from chasing his potential to embodying her own worth. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 2. Because next we are going deeper into when she stops explaining her worth, and why the moment she no longer tries to convince him of her value becomes the moment her energy becomes impossible to ignore. Chapter 2. When she stops explaining her worth. There comes a moment when she stops trying to explain her worth to someone who keeps meeting her with uncertainty. That is where this chapter begins. Because for a long time, she may have believed that if she could just find the right words, he would finally understand. If she could explain her heart more clearly, he would finally see the depth of what she was offering. If she could describe the connection, name the energy, speak the truth, reveal the pattern, soften his fear, and show him how rare this love was, maybe something in him would finally wake up. So she explained. She explained her feelings. She explained why the silence hurt. She explained why clarity mattered. She explained why the connection felt different. She explained why his distance created confusion. She explained that her heart was not trying to trap him, pressure him, or control him. And maybe those explanations came from love. Maybe they came from hope. Maybe they came from a deep desire to be understood. Maybe they came from the part of her that could feel his hidden heart and wanted to help him feel safe enough to reveal it. But slowly, she begins to realize something painful and powerful. A woman should not have to keep explaining her worth to a man who is ready to honor it. She should not have to keep translating her heart into language that he can avoid. She should not have to keep proving that her love is real. She should not have to keep describing the value of her presence to someone who keeps treating it like something optional, temporary, or endlessly available. That realization changes her, because she starts seeing that over-explaining can become another form of chasing. Not chasing with physical movement, chasing with words, chasing through paragraphs, chasing through emotional clarity, chasing through spiritual insight, chasing through endless attempts to make him see what he is not yet willing to face. And when she sees this, something inside her begins to shift. She stops asking, "How can I explain this so he finally understands?" and starts asking, "Why am I trying so hard to convince someone to value what should be honored naturally?" That question becomes a doorway, because the moment she stops explaining her worth, she takes her power back from the need to be understood by someone who may still be committed to misunderstanding, avoiding, or delaying. This does not mean she never communicates. This does not mean she becomes silent in a wounded way. This does not mean she refuses honest conversation. It means she stops confusing communication with self-abandonment. There is a difference. Communication says, "Here is my truth." Over-explaining says, "Please validate my truth before I trust it." Communication comes from clarity. Over-explaining often comes from fear. Communication honors both people. Over-explaining drains the one who is trying to be seen by someone who is not fully looking. This is the shift. She may still speak truth, but she no longer begs for that truth to be believed. She may still express herself, but she no longer gives her emotional energy away trying to convince him of something his soul already knows, but his fear refuses to admit. She may still be open to a conversation, but she is no longer willing to become a courtroom where she must defend the value of her love. That is feminine power. Quiet, clear, grounded. The kind of power that says, "I know what I bring. I know how deeply I love. I know the purity of my intention. I know my softness is not something I need to justify. I know my presence is sacred even if someone else does not know how to receive it." This is the energy that changes the dynamic. Because when she was explaining, he could stay in the position of evaluator. He could listen and decide. He could receive her words and still remain distant. He could allow her to keep presenting evidence of her love while he stayed protected behind uncertainty. He could let her emotional labor fill the space without offering the same honesty in return. But when she stops explaining, the dynamic collapses. There is no longer a case to argue. No longer a paragraph to decode. No longer a plea for him to understand. No longer a constant stream of emotional energy moving toward him. Now, he must meet the silence of a woman who knows her worth. And that silence feels different. It is not empty. It is full of self-respect. It says, "I have spoken enough. I have shown enough. I have given enough. I will not keep turning my heart into evidence for someone who is not ready to honor it." And he feels that, because he can sense when her energy is no longer trying to convince him. He can sense when she is no longer trying to prove the connection. He can sense when she has stopped reaching through language and returned to inner knowing. And this can unsettle him. Because when she stops explaining, he is left with his own understanding. Not the understanding she keeps handing him. His own. He must ask himself, what did I already know, but refused to admit? What did I hear in her words that I avoided responding to? What truth was she trying to show me that I was not ready to face? What did I take for granted because she kept explaining it? These questions can begin awakening him. Because as long as she keeps explaining, he can focus on her effort. But when she stops, the focus shifts back to him. Her silence becomes a mirror. Her absence of explanation becomes an invitation to search his own truth instead of relying on hers. This is why her stopping is powerful. It creates space for his inner voice. When she was explaining, her voice filled the room. When she stops, he must hear what his own soul says in the quiet. And if the connection is real, his soul may say, "You already knew she mattered. You already knew she was sincere. You already knew her heart was not ordinary. You already knew her clarity was not pressure. It was a request for emotional safety. You already knew she was trying to reach the part of you that kept hiding." That realization can humble him, because he may begin to see that she was not explaining because she was weak. She was explaining because she believed the truth deserved to be understood. She was explaining because she still had hope. She was explaining because she could feel a deeper version of him and wanted to meet him there. But if he did not meet her there, her explanations became exhausting. And now she has stopped. Not because the truth changed, but because she no longer needs to convince him of it. That is a sacred shift. Because a woman who no longer explains her worth has moved from seeking validation to embodying truth. She no longer says, "Please see me." She becomes the woman who sees herself. She no longer says, "Please understand why I matter." She becomes the woman who knows she matters. She no longer says, "Please recognize this connection." She becomes the woman who trusts that what is real does not need to be begged into recognition. This is the moment her feminine energy becomes more magnetic, because she is no longer leaking energy through explanation. She is no longer trying to make him the judge of her value. She is no longer placing her worth in his hands and waiting to see whether he will hold it carefully. She has taken it back. And that is a frequency he cannot ignore if he is connected to her. Because now her energy feels different. Less anxious. Less extended. Less dependent on his response. Less available for emotional ambiguity. More rooted. More sovereign. More peaceful. More aligned with her own truth. This new energy can activate something in him because it shows him a woman who has stopped making herself small enough to be considered. She is no longer shrinking her needs to avoid scaring him. She is no longer over-softening her truth, so he will not retreat. She is no longer turning her emotional intelligence into a tool to excuse his emotional absence. She becomes clear. And clarity is powerful. Because when a woman becomes clear, she stops participating in confusion. She stops explaining why silence hurts to someone who keeps choosing silence. She stops explaining why consistency matters to someone who benefits from inconsistency. She stops explaining why love needs respect to someone who wants access without accountability. She stops explaining why her heart is sacred to someone who keeps treating it casually. Instead, she lets her choices speak. That is the deeper shift. Before, her words tried to carry her value. Now her boundaries carry it. Before, her explanations tried to prove her love. Now her self-respect proves she has learned to love herself. Before, she told him what she deserved. Now, she lives like she believes it. And that is what changes everything. Because a man can ignore words. But he cannot ignore a changed energy. He may dismiss a message. He may avoid a conversation. He may delay a response. He may pretend not to understand. But when her entire energy shifts from proving to knowing, he feels the difference. He feels that she is no longer waiting for him to validate what she already understands. He feels that if he remains uncertain, she will not build her life around his uncertainty. He feels that if he cannot meet her, she will not keep explaining why he should. And that can trigger his awakening. Because now he is no longer being asked to understand through her words. He is being invited to understand through her absence. Through her stillness. through her groundedness, through the quiet dignity of a woman who has stopped defending her sacredness. This is where he may begin to see her differently. Not as the woman who keeps trying, but as the woman who knows. Not as the woman asking to be chosen, but as the woman who has chosen herself. Not as the woman offering endless explanations, but as the woman whose silence now says more than her paragraphs ever did. That kind of silence can become unforgettable, because it carries completion. Not completion of love necessarily, completion of the need to prove. And when the need to prove ends, her energy becomes free. Free to return to her own life. Free to receive what actually meets her. Free to stop exhausting herself in emotional translation. Free to stop turning his avoidance into a project for her compassion. This freedom is not only healing for her, it is revealing for him. Because he can no longer pretend he does not understand simply because she is no longer offering endless explanations. He must confront whether he truly did not know, or whether he knew and was not ready to respond with maturity. That distinction matters. Sometimes he did not need more explanation. He needed more courage. Sometimes he did not need her to say it differently. He needed to stop hiding from what she had already said. Sometimes he was not confused by her worth. He was intimidated by what honoring her worth would require from him. That is the truth her silence reveals. Because if he honors her worth, he must rise. He must communicate. He must become honest. He must stop offering half-presents. He must stop depending on her to keep explaining what he already knows. He must stop making her do the emotional labor of proving why she deserves to be met. And if he is not ready to rise, then her silence protects her. That is the beauty of this feminine shift. It changes him if he is ready, and it saves her if he is not. Because when she stops explaining her worth, she stops losing energy to someone else's unreadiness. She stops placing her peace in the hands of his response. She stops living as if her value becomes real only when he recognizes it. She returns to herself. And that return is priceless. For the divine feminine, this chapter carries a powerful message. You do not need to keep explaining your worth to someone who is benefiting from not understanding it. You do not need to keep proving that your love is rare. You do not need to keep defending your need for clarity, consistency, respect, or emotional safety. You do not need to keep translating your softness into a language someone keeps refusing to speak. Your worth is not an argument. Your heart is not a debate. Your love is not evidence to be submitted for approval. You are not here to convince someone that you are worthy of being chosen. You are here to remember that your worth exists before anyone chooses you. That is where freedom begins. Because when she stops explaining her worth, she gives herself permission to stop performing for recognition. She stops shaping her truth around his capacity. She stops lowering the volume of her needs so he will stay comfortable. She stops trying to make her depth easier for someone who is still afraid of depth. And in that moment, she becomes more fully herself. Not harder. Tua. Not colder. Clearer. Not less loving. More aligned. She still has compassion, but it no longer overrides self-respect. She still has love, but it no longer requires self-abandonment. She still has understanding, but it no longer becomes an excuse to stay where she is not being valued. This is mature feminine energy. Softness with sovereignty. Love with standards. Presence with boundaries. Openness with discernment. And this kind of energy cannot be manipulated by ambiguity for long. Because she knows. If he values her, he will not need endless convincing. If he is ready, he will not require her to keep proving the connection. If he wants to meet her, he will bring his own clarity. If he does not, her life will not remain suspended in the waiting. That is feminine receiving at a higher level. She is willing to receive love, but not confusion disguised as love. She is willing to receive communication, but not crumbs disguised as effort. She is willing to receive masculine presence, but not emotional absence with spiritual excuses. She is willing to receive truth, but not a dynamic where she has to explain why she deserves it. That is the standard of the awakened feminine. And when she lives from that standard, she changes. Her energy becomes calm because she is no longer bargaining with reality. Her heart becomes stronger because it is no longer trying to survive on hope alone. Her presence becomes more magnetic because it is no longer scattered across his silence. She becomes a woman who no longer asks the wrong person to confirm the right truth. She knows, and that knowing becomes her peace. This is what he feels. He may feel her no longer explaining. He may feel the absence of her emotional labor. He may feel that she is no longer trying to get him to see what he refused to honor. He may feel that the old access to her words, her patience, her endless clarifying, is no longer available. And in that absence, he may realize, she said enough. She showed enough. She gave enough. Now it is my turn to decide whether I am willing to meet the truth she no longer has to explain. That is where his masculine responsibility may begin. Because when feminine energy stops explaining, masculine energy is invited to act. Not react. Act. With clarity. With honesty. With presence. With the willingness to bring something real instead of waiting for her to keep building the bridge. This is the sacred polarity. The feminine stops overfunctioning. The masculine is invited to step into function. The feminine stops proving. The masculine is invited to recognize. The feminine stops chasing through words. The masculine is invited to find his own voice. That is the energy shift. And it can change him forever because it requires him to grow beyond passivity. He can no longer remain the silent receiver of her explanations. He must become a conscious participant in truth. He must ask what he feels, what he wants, what he fears, and whether he has the courage to communicate it. If he does, the connection may rise. If he does not, she still remains whole. That is the power. Because her shift is not dependent on his response. She does not stop explaining so he will finally understand. She stops explaining because she finally understands herself. She understands that she is worthy. She understands that her love is sacred. She understands that communication must be mutual. She understands that a connection cannot be built by one person endlessly translating truth to someone who refuses to meet it. And once she understands that, she is free. Free to speak once and let it be enough. Free to walk away from confusion without needing to prove why it hurts. Free to trust that the right love will not require her to become exhausted explaining the basics of respect. Free to stop making someone else's inability to value her into a reflection of her value. That is the sacred truth of Chapter 2. When she stops explaining her worth, the feminine energy shifts from proving to knowing. She no longer chases through words, no longer defends the depth of her heart, and no longer makes him the judge of her value. Her silence becomes grounded, not wounded. Her boundaries become clear, not harsh. Her energy becomes magnetic because it is no longer leaking into the need to be understood. And if he is ready, this changes him. Because now he must find his own clarity. He must hear his own truth. He must decide whether he is willing to meet a woman who no longer explains why she deserves to be honored. And if he is not ready, her shift still changes her. It brings her home. That is where Chapter 2 leaves us. With the understanding that her worth was never something she needed to argue. It was something she needed to embody. And the moment she stops explaining it, her energy becomes impossible to ignore. If this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 3. Because next we are going deeper into the power of softness with boundaries. And why the feminine energy that changes him forever is not the softness that overgives, but the softness that finally knows how to protect itself. Chapter 3. The power of softness with boundaries. The feminine energy that changes him forever is not the softness that keeps giving until she disappears. It is the softness that finally learns how to protect itself. That is where this chapter begins. Because for a long time, she may have believed that being feminine meant being endlessly open, endlessly patient, endlessly understanding, endlessly available to his fear, his silence, his confusion, his wounds, his distance, and the version of him she could feel beneath the mask. She may have believed that softness meant never closing the door. That compassion meant never having limits. That love meant staying emotionally available even when her heart was not being handled with care. So she softened. Again and again. When he pulled away, she softened. When he went silent, she softened. When he returned with half clarity, she softened. When he could not name what he felt, she softened. When his fear created distance, she softened enough for both of them. And maybe that softness was real. Maybe it came from her heart. Maybe it came from her soul. Maybe it came from the sacred part of her that could see his pain and did not want to become another person who punished him for being wounded. But somewhere along the way, softness without boundaries became self-abandonment. And this is the lesson she begins to learn. Softness is sacred. But softness without self-respect becomes depletion. Compassion is beautiful. But compassion without boundaries becomes emotional exhaustion. Love is powerful. But love without standards becomes a place where she slowly loses herself trying to protect someone else from the consequences of their own unreadiness. That is why the true feminine shift is not from soft to hard. It is from unprotected softness to sovereign softness. This difference matters deeply. Because many women, after being hurt, think the only way to become safe is to become cold. They think they must shut down, detach completely, build walls, stop caring, stop feeling, stop trusting, stop being tender. They think power means becoming untouchable. But that is not true feminine power. That is the nervous system trying to survive. True feminine power does not kill the softness. It protects it. She does not become hard. She becomes clear. She does not stop loving. She stops overgiving. She does not abandon compassion. She simply stops using compassion as an excuse to ignore the way she is being treated. This is the power of softness with boundaries. It says, I can understand your fear, but I will not become a home for your avoidance. I can feel compassion for your wounds, but I will not let those wounds keep wounding me. I can love your hidden heart, but I will not keep sacrificing my peace for a version of you that has not become present. I can remain soft, but I will no longer remain unprotected. That is a sacred shift. Because before this shift, her softness may have been flowing outward without discernment. She may have given because she felt. She may have forgiven because she understood. She may have waited because she believed. She may have stayed open because she did not want to lose the connection. But after the shift, her softness begins listening to wisdom. It asks, is this love being honored? Is this connection nourishing me too? Am I giving from overflow or from fear? Am I staying open because it feels aligned, or because I am afraid that if I close my energy, he will leave? These questions transform her, because she begins to understand that boundaries are not the opposite of love. Boundaries are how love remains healthy. A boundary is not a wall built from bitterness. A boundary is a doorway with truth standing at the entrance. It says, you may enter with respect. You may enter with honesty. You may enter with consistency. You may enter with emotional responsibility. But you may not enter with confusion and call it depth. You may not enter with silence and call it mystery. You may not enter with inconsistency and call it fear. You may not enter with hidden feelings while leaving my heart to carry visible pain. That is not harsh. That is holy. Because her softness is not meant to be a place where another person's avoidance comes to rest without accountability. Her softness is not meant to become a shelter for someone who refuses to grow. Her softness is not meant to be endlessly accessible to a man who only reaches when he is lonely, but disappears when truth asks for maturity. Her softness is sacred space, and sacred space must be protected. This is what changes him. Because when she was soft without boundaries, he may have felt comfort, but he did not necessarily feel the call to rise. He could come close, receive warmth, retreat into fear, and still trust that her softness would remain available. He could be inconsistent and still feel forgiven. He could be vague and still feel emotionally held. He could hide behind silence and still sense that she would understand. But when her softness gains boundaries, the energetic field changes. Now her love is still warm, but it is no longer careless with itself. Her heart is still open, but it is no longer standing unguarded in front of his inconsistency. Her presence is still beautiful, but it is no longer available to a dynamic that drains her. He feels that. He feels that she has not become cold. She has become conscious. And conscious softness is powerful. Because it does not beg. It does not chase. It does not collapse. It does not over-explain. It does not keep giving just because someone has potential. It receives what is real. And it withdraws from what is not aligned. This creates a different kind of invitation for the divine masculine. Before, her softness may have invited him to feel safe. Now, her softness with boundaries invites him to become safe too. That is the difference. She is no longer only creating emotional safety for him. She is requiring emotional safety for herself. She is no longer only asking, how can I love him so he feels secure? She is also asking, can he love me in a way that allows me to feel secure? That question is the beginning of mature connection. Because one-sided safety is not love. If only his nervous system is protected, while hers is constantly activated by silence, inconsistency, and uncertainty, then the connection is not balanced. If she keeps softening so he does not feel pressured, while her own heart keeps feeling abandoned, then her softness has become a sacrifice. An awakened feminine energy no longer sacrifices itself to maintain the illusion of love. It stands in truth. A soft woman with boundaries does not say, I will make myself easy to love by having no needs. She says, I am worthy of love that can meet my needs with care. She does not say, I will stay quiet so you do not feel overwhelmed. She says, I can speak gently, but I will not erase my truth to protect your avoidance. She does not say, I will forgive every silence because I know you are wounded. She says, I understand wounds, but I also understand responsibility. This is the energy that changes him forever. Because it shows him a version of the feminine he may not be used to. A woman who is loving, but not available for emotional laziness. A woman who is compassionate, but not self-neglecting. A woman who is intuitive, but not delusional. A woman who can feel the soul bond and still require grounded behavior. A woman who can see his potential and still choose not to live inside it. That kind of woman becomes a mirror. A mirror that says, your fear does not get to rule this space. Your wounds do not get to define the terms of love. Your hidden feelings do not replace visible presence. Your desire for comfort does not override my need for emotional safety. And if he is beginning to awaken, this mirror may humble him. Because he may realize that love is not simply about being accepted as he is while he remains unconscious. Love is also an invitation to become more honest, more present, more responsible, and more capable of meeting another person with care. Her boundaries show him where he has been relying on her softness without becoming accountable to it. They show him where he has expected understanding without offering clarity. They show him where he has wanted access without consistency. They show him where he has mistaken her gentleness for something without limits. This can be uncomfortable. But discomfort is not always a bad thing. Sometimes discomfort is the soul recognizing that the old pattern no longer works. He may feel the edge of her boundary, and at first, his ego may react. He may think, why is she different now? Why is she not as available? Why does her warmth feel protected? Why does it feel like I cannot approach her the same way anymore? And the deeper answer is simple. Because she cannot approach herself the same way anymore. She has changed. She has learned. She has felt the cost of unprotected softness. She has seen what happens when she gives tenderness to a dynamic that does not give safety back. And now her softness has become wiser. This wisdom is not bitterness. It is maturity. A bitter heart says, I will never open again. A mature heart says, I will open where there is respect. A bitter heart says, no one deserves my softness. A mature heart says, my softness deserves a safe place to land. A bitter heart shuts down love. A mature heart refines access. That is the awakened feminine. She does not close her heart to punish the world. She becomes discerning enough to know where her heart can be received. And that discernment changes the way she moves. She no longer gives immediate access just because she feels a connection. She no longer confuses chemistry with safety. She no longer assumes intensity means readiness. She no longer believes that because she can see someone's wounds, she must offer herself as the place where those wounds are healed. She understands now. I can love someone and still not be the place where they avoid their own work. I can feel someone deeply and still choose distance if their behavior is not safe. I can remain soft and still say no. That no is sacred. Because every time she says no to imbalance, she says yes to herself. Every time she says no to confusion, she says yes to clarity. Every time she says no to emotional crumbs, she says yes to the kind of love that can nourish her. And this is where her feminine energy becomes magnetic in a deeper way. Not magnetic because she is trying to attract him. Magnetic because she is no longer abandoning herself. There is a radiance that comes from a woman who knows her softness is valuable. There is a calm power in a woman who does not need to prove she is loving by tolerating what hurts her. There is an unmistakable energy in a woman who can remain kind while also remaining unavailable to patterns that drain her. He feels that. He may feel drawn to it. He may feel challenged by it. He may feel exposed by it. Because this kind of softness does not let him stay asleep as easily. Unprotected softness can sometimes enable avoidance. Protected softness reveals it. When she has boundaries, he cannot keep approaching her with vague energy and expect full access. He cannot keep offering half-truths and expect full warmth. He cannot keep disappearing and expect her to keep the emotional door open exactly as before. He must meet the boundary. And the boundary asks him, can you be honest? Can you be consistent? Can you be emotionally responsible? Can you meet softness with protection instead of taking shelter inside it? That last question is important. Because many wounded masculine energies seek feminine softness as comfort, but not always as a sacred space to honor. They want her warmth when they are tired, her forgiveness when they are ashamed, her understanding when they are confused, her patience when they are not ready. But awakened masculine energy does not only receive softness. It protects it. It understands that if a woman opens her heart, that openness is not something to use casually. It is not something to enter when convenient and leave when afraid. It is not something to keep testing through inconsistency. It is something to honor. And when her softness has boundaries, it teaches him that. It teaches him that feminine love is not endless emotional labor. It teaches him that softness is not weakness. It teaches him that a woman can be gentle and still walk away. It teaches him that receiving love requires responsibility. It teaches him that if he wants access to her heart, he must bring a level of truth that matches the sacredness of what he is asking to receive. That is why her boundaries can become part of his awakening. Not because she sets them to change him, but because they reveal what he must become if he wants to meet her. And if he is not willing to become that, her boundaries still serve their purpose. They protect her. This is where the divine feminine must understand the true meaning of boundaries. A boundary is not a tool to make him act right. A boundary is a commitment to herself. It says, whether he changes or not, I will not keep betraying my peace. Whether he awakens or not, I will not abandon my heart. Whether he meets me or not, I will not make myself endlessly available to emotional absence. This is what gives her power. Because if her boundary depends on his response, it is not fully a boundary yet. It is a negotiation. A true boundary remains true even if he does not react the way she hoped. That is why softness with boundaries is so transformational. It is not performance. It is embodiment. She does not say, I will act unavailable so he values me. She says, I am no longer available to what does not value me. That is different. One is strategy. The other is self-respect. And when her self-respect becomes embodied, her energy becomes clean. No hidden manipulation. No silent punishment. No desperate waiting beneath the surface. Just truth. I love deeply, but I will not lose myself. I can remain open, but I will not stay open to harm. I can forgive, but I will also remember what I learned. I can understand your fear, but I will not make a home inside your avoidance. This is the feminine shift that changes everything. Because now she is no longer asking him to protect her heart while she continues placing it in unsafe hands. She is protecting her own heart first. And from that protected place, she can finally discern whether he is capable of meeting her. This makes her less reactive. She does not spiral as easily when he pulls away. She does not over-explain when he is unclear. She does not give more because he gives less. She does not chase simply because she feels the bond. Instead, she watches. Not with suspicion. With wisdom. She watches whether his words match his actions. She watches whether his return carries responsibility. She watches whether his warmth is consistent or temporary. She watches whether he respects the boundary or only tries to bypass it. This is not coldness. This is feminine discernment. And discernment is one of the highest expressions of self-love. Because an awakened feminine heart does not need to reject love to protect itself. It simply learns how to recognize where love is truly present. Real love will not punish her boundaries. Real love will not require her to over-explain her needs. Real love will not demand access without accountability. Real love will not make her feel guilty for protecting her peace. Real love may be challenged by her boundaries at first, but if it is mature, it will respect them. And if he is awakening, he will begin to understand that her boundaries are not walls keeping him out. They are standards inviting him to come in correctly. With truth. With presence. With care. With the willingness to meet her softness as something sacred, not something guaranteed. This is the higher lesson for him. Her boundaries are not rejection. They are instruction. They show him how her heart must be approached. They show him that love is not access without responsibility. They show him that if he wants a conscious woman, he must become a conscious man. And that may change him forever. Because he may have never met softness like this before. Softness that does not chase. Softness that does not beg. Softness that does not punish. Softness that does not collapse. Softness that can hold love in one hand and self-respect in the other. This kind of softness is unforgettable. It reaches deeper than intensity. It speaks louder than over-explaining. It awakens more than pursuit. Because it carries the frequency of truth. And truth changes the field. It tells him, without forcing him, here is the love. Here is the boundary. Here is the door. But you must enter with honesty. And if you cannot, I will not destroy myself trying to teach you how. That is the sacred power of Chapter 3. The feminine energy that changes him forever is the power of softness with boundaries. She does not become hard. She becomes clear. She does not stop loving. She stops overgiving. She does not abandon compassion. She simply refuses to use compassion as an excuse to tolerate emotional absence, inconsistency, or confusion. Her softness becomes protected. Her heart becomes wise. Her energy becomes grounded. And now, he can no longer meet her through the old pattern. He must either rise into truth or remain where he is. But either way, she remains with herself. That is where Chapter 3 leaves us. With the understanding that true feminine softness is not weakness, and true boundaries are not coldness. Together, they create a sacred energy that invites the masculine to grow while protecting the feminine from losing herself. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 4. Because next we are going deeper into why her silence feels different now. And why the silence of a woman who has chosen herself can become more powerful than all the words she once used to explain her heart. Chapter 4. Why her silence feels different now. There is a silence that comes from pain. And there is a silence that comes from power. That is where this chapter begins. Because for a long time, when the divine feminine went silent, it may not have been true peace. It may have been wounded silence. The kind of silence where she was still waiting. Still checking. Still hoping he would feel her absence. Still wondering whether he noticed. Still secretly wanting him to come forward and prove that the connection mattered. Her mouth may have been quiet, but her energy was still reaching. Her phone was still being watched. Her heart was still leaning toward him. Her thoughts were still circling the connection. Her body was still waiting for the moment his name appeared again. That kind of silence is not empty. It is full of longing. And he may have felt that. He may have felt that even when she stopped speaking, she had not fully returned to herself. He may have felt that her silence still carried a question, a hope, a pull, a silent invitation for him to notice the absence and come closer. But then something changes. Her silence becomes different. Not because she is trying harder to be silent. Not because she is punishing him. Not because she is forcing herself to act detached while secretly breaking inside. It becomes different because she is no longer waiting in the same way. Her silence is no longer a message to him. It is a return to herself. That is the shift. Before, her silence said, "Will you notice I am gone?" Now her silence says, "I am finally present with myself." Before, her silence said, "Please feel what you are losing." Now her silence says, "I am no longer losing myself." Before, her silence was still connected to his response. Now her silence is connected to her own peace. And this is why it feels different. Because energy speaks louder than behavior. Two women can stop texting, stop calling, stop explaining, and stop reaching. But the energy underneath can be completely different. One is silent from anxiety. The other is silent from alignment. One is waiting to be chosen. The other has chosen herself. One is withholding to create a reaction. The other is resting because she no longer needs to perform for love. And the divine masculine can feel the difference. He may not have the words for it, but he feels it. He feels when her silence is still chasing him energetically. He feels when her quiet is full of unspoken pleading. He feels when her absence is really a strategy to pull him closer. And he also feels when her silence has become clean. When it is no longer trying to control him. When it is no longer asking him to rescue her from uncertainty. When it is no longer filled with the desperate hope that he will finally become the man she sensed beneath the mask. This clean silence is powerful. Because it does not chase. It does not argue. It does not explain. It does not negotiate. It simply stands in truth. And truth has a frequency. It says, "I have spoken enough. I have reached enough. I have waited enough. Now I am listening to myself." That kind of silence changes the entire field. Because when she was using words, he could respond to the words. He could agree, disagree, avoid, delay, misunderstand, or stay silent himself. When she was explaining, he could focus on her explanation. When she was reaching, he could focus on her reaching. When she was asking for clarity, he could feel pressure and retreat into his familiar defenses. But now there is nothing to push against. No emotional pursuit. No long message. No attempt to convince him. No anxious energy asking him to define what he feels before he is willing to face it. There is only her grounded absence. And that absence becomes a mirror. It shows him the silence he created. It shows him the emotional space he left empty. It shows him what happens when she no longer fills the gap. It shows him that her voice was not something he could take for granted. This is why her silence feels different now. Because it is not the silence of someone waiting to be saved. It is the silence of someone saving herself. And that kind of silence can be louder than every word she ever spoke. He may begin to wonder why the quiet feels heavier. Why her absence no longer feels like the old familiar pause. Why he does not feel the same energetic thread pulling at him in the way it used to. Why he feels her less in the chase, but more in the truth. Because she has stopped sending her energy into the old pattern. She has stopped using silence as another form of reaching. She has stopped secretly hoping that her absence will become a performance he cannot ignore. Instead, she has become still. And stillness, when it is real, has power. Not loud power. Not dramatic power. Not the power of trying to be seen. The power of being anchored so deeply in herself that she no longer needs to be emotionally loud to be felt. That is awakened feminine silence. It is not passive. It is not weak. It is not avoidance. It is the moment she stops negotiating with emotional absence. She no longer says, "Maybe if I explain one more time, he will understand." She no longer says, "Maybe if I wait in pain, he will realize my value." She no longer says, "Maybe if I stay available, he will finally feel safe enough to choose me." Instead, she says, "I choose peace. I choose clarity. I choose the love that does not require me to abandon my own nervous system. I choose the silence that allows me to hear my own soul again. And this silence becomes medicine. For her first. Because before her silence changes him, it heals her. It gives her room to breathe. It gives her room to feel what she has been avoiding while focused on him. It gives her room to notice her own exhaustion. It gives her room to hear the parts of herself that were drowned out by the chase. In that silence, she may realize how tired she was. Tired of explaining. Tired of waiting. Tired of interpreting. Tired of carrying hope alone. Tired of making herself emotionally available to someone who was not offering the same presence. And instead of rushing back into the old pattern, she stays. She stays with herself. She listens. She lets the ache move through her without turning it into another message. She lets the longing rise without making it an instruction to reach. She lets the memories come without using them as proof that she must reopen the door. This is where she becomes stronger. Because the old version of her may have felt emotion and acted immediately. She felt longing, so she reached. She felt anxiety, so she explained. She felt the energetic pull, so she tried to reconnect. She felt his distance, so she tried to close it. But the awakened feminine feels emotion and returns to presence. She feels longing and breathes. She feels sadness and holds herself. She feels the urge to reach and asks, "Is this aligned, or am I abandoning myself again?" She feels the energetic pull and says, "I can feel this without chasing it." That is power. The power to feel deeply without being ruled by the feeling. The power to love without losing herself inside the love. The power to remain soft without becoming available to old pain. And this is what he feels. He feels a woman who is no longer emotionally reacting to his distance. He feels a woman whose silence does not need him to interpret it. He feels a woman who is not waiting outside the door of his avoidance, hoping he will finally open it. She is no longer outside his door. She has gone home to herself. And that changes the way he experiences her. Because before, her silence may have still contained him at the center. Now her silence contains herself. Her own healing. Her own rhythm. Her own truth. Her own relationship with life beyond him. And that can unsettle him. Because it shows him that she is not frozen in the old place. She is moving inward. She is becoming whole. She is no longer orbiting him. He may begin to feel that her absence is not temporary in the same way. Not because she has hardened, but because she has matured. Not because she no longer cares, but because she no longer confuses caring with chasing. Not because the connection meant nothing, but because she finally means something to herself. That realization can awaken respect. Because a woman who can be silent without bitterness carries a different kind of strength. A woman who can withdraw without manipulation carries a different kind of dignity. A woman who can stop explaining without hatred carries a different kind of truth. She is not attacking him. She is no longer abandoning herself for him. And if he is awakening, he will feel the difference. He may realize that the silence is not an invitation to play games. It is an invitation to become honest. If he wants to speak, he must bring truth. If he wants to return, he must bring responsibility. If he wants to understand her, he must stop waiting for her to keep explaining herself. If he wants access to her softness, he must approach with maturity, not with the old vague energy. This is why her silence can change him. Because it no longer allows the same dynamic. The old dynamic required her to fill the space. Now the space remains. The old dynamic required her to translate his fear. Now his fear has to speak for itself. The old dynamic required her to keep the connection alive through effort. Now, he has to decide whether he will bring effort of his own. Her silence creates a sacred pause where truth can rise. And in that pause, he may begin to see what he did not see before. How much she said before she became quiet. How much she gave before she stepped back. How much she tried before she stopped trying. How much love was present before self-respect finally required distance. This can bring him into reflection. He may remember her words differently now. The things she used to say may return with new meaning. The clarity she asked for may no longer feel like pressure. It may feel like something reasonable he was too afraid to give. The boundaries she tried to communicate may no longer feel like demands. They may feel like truths he should have respected earlier. Her silence makes her old words echo. That is another reason it feels different. When she stops speaking, he finally has room to hear what she already said. Because sometimes, as long as she is still talking, he keeps postponing understanding. He assumes there will be another conversation, another explanation, another chance for her to soften the truth, another opportunity for him to avoid fully absorbing the impact. But when she becomes quiet, her previous words become final in a new way. Not final as punishment. Final as enough. She no longer repeats herself. And what she no longer repeats becomes louder. He may realize. She told me this hurt. She told me she needed clarity. She told me she could not keep carrying the connection alone. She told me her heart was tired. She told me with love before she had to show me with distance. That realization can humble him, because her silence reveals that he did not need more information. He needed more responsibility. He did not need another explanation. He needed to meet the truth he had already been given. And now, if he wants to come forward, he must come forward without relying on her to pull him there. That is the masculine invitation inside feminine silence. It asks him to initiate truth, not because she is demanding it, but because she is no longer doing it for him. It asks him to step out of passivity, not because she is pushing him, but because she has stopped pushing. It asks him to feel the weight of his own silence, not because she is punishing him, but because she is no longer carrying it. This is the sacred difference. Her old silence may have said, "I hope he comes." Her new silence says, "I am already with myself." Her old silence may have been full of waiting. Her new silence is full of presence. Her old silence may have tried to affect him. Her new silence is not about him. And because it is not about him, it affects him more deeply. Because nothing awakens the old dynamic like a woman who no longer feeds it. When she is not trying to be seen, he may finally see her. When she is not trying to be heard, he may finally hear the echo of everything she already said. When she is not trying to be chosen, he may finally feel the dignity of the woman who chose herself. But again, this is not guaranteed. Her silence may invite his awakening, but it does not control it. Some men will meet her silence with pride. Some will tell themselves she never cared. Some will turn her self-respect into rejection because they are not ready to face the truth of their own absence. Some will remain in avoidance because silence alone cannot force a person to grow. And that is why her silence must be for her. Not for his reaction. Not for his awakening. Not for the hope that he will finally understand. Her silence must be the place where she returns to her own truth. If he awakens in that space, he awakens. If he does not, she still heals. That is the freedom of empowered silence. It does not depend on being understood. It is already aligned. For the divine feminine, this chapter is a reminder. Do not use silence as a costume for chasing. Do not go quiet only to watch whether he notices. Do not withhold words while secretly begging energetically. Do not call it detachment if your whole inner world is still waiting for his response. Be gentle with yourself if that happens. Because healing is a process. But also be honest. True silence is not forced. It is chosen from self-respect. It is the silence that comes after you have spoken your truth and realized that repeating it will not make it more sacred. It is the silence that comes when your nervous system needs peace more than your ego needs proof. It is the silence that comes when your soul says, "Enough, come back." And when you come back, silence becomes soft again. Not cold. Soft. Soft like rest. Soft like prayer. Soft like the deep breath you take when you stop carrying a conversation that was never yours to carry alone. This silence restores you. It allows your energy to gather. It lets your intuition become clearer. It helps you hear the difference between longing and alignment. It reminds you that your voice is sacred, but so is your peace. And from that silence, you may begin to see the connection differently. You may see where you were over-explaining. You may see where you were hoping his potential would become presence. You may see where you were using words to bridge a gap he needed to learn how to cross. You may see where your love was real, but your access was too available. This seeing is healing. Because now, if he returns, you do not return to the old communication pattern. You do not immediately over-explain. You do not rush to make him comfortable. You do not soften your truth until it becomes small enough for his avoidance to tolerate. You listen. You observe. You stay connected to yourself. You let him bring words. You let him show whether he has reflected. You let him meet the silence with his own honesty. That is powerful. Because the awakened feminine understands that a conscious connection cannot be built by one person speaking for both hearts. He must bring his voice too. His clarity. His accountability. His truth. His willingness to meet what her silence has revealed. And if he cannot, her silence will keep protecting her. Not as a wall. As a sanctuary. A sanctuary where she remembers that love does not need to be chased, begged for, or explained into existence. A sanctuary where she no longer mistakes emotional noise for emotional intimacy. A sanctuary where she can feel the connection and still choose peace. That is the sacred truth of Chapter 4. Her silence feels different now because it is no longer wounded waiting. It is empowered presence. She is not silent to punish him, manipulate him, or force him to awaken. She is silent because she has returned to herself. She has spoken enough, given enough, explained enough. And now her energy no longer participates in the old pattern. This silence changes the field. It gives him space to hear what he avoided. It gives her space to heal what she abandoned. It reveals whether his silence was hiding truth or simply avoiding responsibility. It reveals whether the connection can rise without her carrying every word. And if he is ready, her silence may become the moment he finally understands the weight of what she once tried to say. But if he is not ready, her silence still becomes her freedom. Because she is no longer using her voice to convince someone of her worth. She is using her silence to remember it. That is where Chapter 4 leaves us. With the understanding that empowered feminine silence is not emptiness. It is self-respect. It is not the absence of love. It is the presence of peace. It is not the end of her softness. It is the beginning of her sovereignty. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 5. Because next we are going deeper into when her energy returns to her body. And why the moment she stops living in her head and comes back into her own embodied feminine presence becomes the moment her energy becomes impossible to forget. Chapter 5. When her energy returns to her body. There comes a moment when she stops living in her head and returns to her body. That is where this chapter begins. Because when the divine feminine has been caught in the cycle of chasing, over-explaining, waiting, and trying to understand his silence, her energy often leaves her body before she even realizes it. She becomes mental. She analyzes. She remembers. She predicts. She imagines. She replays every word. She searches for hidden meanings. She tries to feel what he is feeling from a distance. Her body may be in one place, but her energy is somewhere else. It is in his silence. It is in his phone. It is in his unread message. It is in the future conversation she hopes will happen. It is in the past moment where things felt warm before they changed. It is in the invisible space between what he showed and what she sensed. And slowly, she becomes disconnected from herself. Not because she is weak. Not because she is dramatic. Not because her intuition is false. But because emotional uncertainty can pull the feminine out of embodiment and into survival. She begins trying to solve love like a puzzle. If he said this, what did he mean? If he watched but did not respond, what does that mean? If he pulled away after opening up, was he scared? If I can still feel him, is he thinking about me? If the connection is real, why is he silent? And the more she tries to answer these questions, the farther she moves from her own body. This is important, because feminine energy is not most powerful when it is trapped in mental loops. Feminine energy is most powerful when it is embodied. When she is in her breath, in her senses, in her intuition, in her softness, in her creativity, in her physical presence. in the deep knowing that lives beneath anxious thought. But when she chases, she often leaves that place. She becomes consumed by the masculine's movement or lack of movement. She begins measuring her inner peace by his outer behavior. If he responds, her body relaxes. If he disappears, her body tightens. If he gives warmth, she feels alive. If he becomes distant, she feels abandoned. Her nervous system becomes connected to his inconsistency. And that is exhausting, because she is no longer living from her own center. She is living in response to him. That is why the feminine energy shift that changes everything requires more than silence, more than boundaries, more than not reaching. It requires embodiment. She must come back into her own body, back into the place where her intuition is clean, back into the place where her desire is alive, back into the place where her peace is not dependent on his clarity, back into the place where she can feel the truth without being ruled by fear. This is where her energy begins to change at the deepest level. Because when her energy returns to her body, she stops orbiting him. She stops living as a question. She stops trying to find her worth in his response. She stops turning every quiet moment into an investigation of his feelings. Instead, she begins to ask, what am I feeling in my own body right now? What do I need? Where am I tense? Where have I abandoned myself? Where is my energy leaking? Where am I confusing intuition with anxiety? These questions bring her home. And home is where her power lives. Because the body tells the truth. Her mind may make excuses. Her heart may hold compassion. Her soul may sense potential. But her body knows when something is not safe. Her body knows when she is overextending. Her body knows when she is waiting in pain. Her body knows when silence is activating her nervous system. Her body knows when love is becoming confused with longing, obsession, or self-abandonment. And when she finally listens to her body, she begins to understand something sacred. A connection can be deep and still not be healthy for her nervous system in its current form. A soul bond can be real and still require boundaries. A man can have hidden feelings and still not be emotionally safe to receive without maturity. Her body may say what her hope avoided saying. I am tired. I am anxious. I am not being met. I need rest. I need safety. I need to stop reaching into this silence. That is not weakness. That is wisdom. And when she honors that wisdom, her feminine energy begins returning to its natural state. Less forced. Less anxious. Less mentally consumed. Less desperate for proof. More grounded. More sensual. More intuitive. More present. More alive. This is the energy he feels. Because before, when she was stuck in her head, her energy may have felt searching. It may have felt like she was constantly trying to locate him emotionally, trying to figure him out, trying to pull clarity from a place that was not offering it, trying to hold on to the connection through mental effort. But when she returns to her body, the search stops. She is no longer reaching outward for evidence. She is feeling inward for truth. And that changes her frequency. She becomes softer, but not weaker. She becomes quieter, but not less powerful. She becomes more open to life, but less available to confusion. She becomes less obsessed with what he is doing and more connected to what she is becoming. That is the feminine energy shift that changes the field. Because a woman in her body is not easy to manipulate with inconsistency. She can feel when words do not match energy. She can feel when someone's presence is not steady. She can feel when her nervous system is contracting even though her heart wants to keep believing. She can feel when she is giving from love and when she is giving from fear. And once she can feel that, she becomes harder to pull back into old patterns. Because embodiment gives her discernment. Not the harsh kind. The holy kind. The kind that says, this feels peaceful. This feels confusing. This feels mutual. This feels one-sided. This feels like love. This feels like longing trying to become love. This feels like truth. This feels like my wound trying to choose for me. That discernment is powerful. Because when she was only in her mind, she could argue with herself forever. She could find reasons, explanations, spiritual meanings, childhood wounds, twin flame theories, energetic signs, and emotional possibilities. She could create entire worlds around why he was silent and why she should keep waiting. But the body simplifies. It asks, do I feel safe? Do I feel nourished? Do I feel respected? Do I feel calm in this connection? Do I feel like I can be soft without losing myself? And if the answer is no, she stops negotiating with reality. That is the shift. She no longer uses her mind to override her body. She no longer tells herself, he is just scared, while her chest is tight and her stomach is anxious. She no longer says, he feels it too, while her nervous system is begging for consistency. She no longer says, this is spiritual, while her body is exhausted from emotional uncertainty. She begins to realize, my body is part of my intuition. My peace is part of my guidance. My nervous system is not an obstacle to love. It is a messenger. And when she honors the messenger, her energy becomes clean. She stops chasing from anxiety. She stops waiting from fear. She stops offering from depletion. She begins giving only where her body remains open, calm, and respected. This changes everything. Because now, her feminine energy is no longer scattered across the unknown. It is gathered into presence. She begins returning to her sensual life. Not necessarily in a sexual way. In a living way. She tastes her food again. She feels the sun on her skin. She moves her body with care. She listens to music and lets it enter her. She creates. She rests. She breathes. She feels her own beauty without needing his eyes to confirm it. This is feminine embodiment. It is the moment she stops existing only as a heart waiting to be chosen and becomes a full woman again. A woman with rhythm. A woman with purpose. A woman with pleasure. A woman with intuition. A woman with a life that does not pause because someone else is unsure. And this is magnetic. Not because she is trying to be magnetic, but because life force has returned to her. When a woman is chasing, her life force often becomes concentrated on one outcome. Will he return? Will he choose? Will he awaken? Will he finally understand? But when she returns to her body, her life force expands again. It flows into creativity. It flows into health. It flows into friendships. It flows into self-expression. It flows into beauty. It flows into her own dreams. It flows into the future she is building with or without him. And he may feel this expansion, because her energy is no longer contracted around his absence. It is blooming in her own presence. This is what can change him forever. He feels that she is not waiting in the same way. He feels that her energy is no longer tense, reaching, hungry for response. He feels that she is becoming more alive without needing him to be the source of that aliveness. And that can be deeply confronting, because when she was waiting, he may have felt like the center of the story. But when she returns to her body, he realizes she has a story of her own, a life of her own, a glow of her own, a rhythm of her own. And he is no longer the sun around which all of her energy turns. This does not mean she does not love him. It means she no longer loses herself in loving him. That difference is everything. Because a woman can love deeply and still remain embodied. She can feel a bond and still go dancing. She can miss someone and still enjoy her life. She can hold compassion and still sleep peacefully. She can sense his energy and still choose not to abandon her own. That is mature feminine energy. It is not addicted to suffering as proof of love. It does not believe that longing must consume her to be real. It does not think that if she feels joy, she has betrayed the connection. It understands that love is not meant to disconnect her from life. Love is meant to make her more alive. And if a connection has pulled her out of life, then her soul will eventually call her back. This is the call she answers in Chapter 5. The call back into her body. Back into the present moment. Back into the truth that her life is happening now, not only in the imagined future where he finally becomes ready. She begins to stop living for the possible reunion and starts living for her own restoration. She may start with small things. A morning walk without checking her phone first. A quiet evening where she does not reread old messages. A meal where she tastes instead of spirals. A breath where she places a hand on her heart and says, I am here. A creative act that brings her energy back into expression. A boundary that gives her nervous system relief. These small choices matter. Because every time she chooses embodiment, she breaks the trance. The trance of waiting. The trance of decoding. The trance of making his silence the center of her emotional reality. She begins to remember. I am not only someone who loves him. I am someone who belongs to myself. That remembering is sacred. And the more she remembers, the more her energy changes. Her eyes become clearer. Her voice becomes steadier. Her body becomes less tense. Her intuition becomes less clouded by fear. Her beauty becomes less dependent on being seen by him. She becomes present. And presence is one of the most powerful feminine frequencies there is. Because presence does not chase the future. It inhabits now. It says, I am here. I am alive. I am whole in this moment. I am not waiting to become worthy. I am not waiting to be chosen before I choose to live. That energy is unforgettable. Because it is free. And when the divine masculine feels that freedom, he may be stirred in a way her chasing never stirred him. Chasing may have activated his avoidance. But her embodiment activates his recognition. He may begin to realize that her energy is not something he can keep half-meeting forever. He may see that she is no longer trying to pull him into her world. She is already living inside her own. If he wants to enter it, he must come with presence. He must come with respect. He must come with something real. Because an embodied woman is not easily satisfied by potential. She can feel potential, yes. But she does not feed on it. She needs presence. She needs truth. She needs energy that meets her in the body, in reality, in action, not only in invisible connection. This is another reason her embodiment changes the dynamic. It grounds the spiritual into the real. Before, she may have lived in the energetic realm of the bond. Signs, synchronicities, dreams, feelings, intuitive knowing. And those may have mattered. They may have been real. But if she lives only there, she may ignore the earthly truth of what is actually happening. Is he communicating? Is he showing up? Is he consistent? Is he emotionally responsible? Is the connection nourishing her actual life? Embodiment brings her back to these questions. Because the body lives in reality. Not fantasy. Not potential. Not someday. Reality. And reality becomes her teacher. She stops asking only, what do I feel spiritually? And starts asking, what am I experiencing emotionally and physically? She stops asking only, what is his higher self saying? And starts asking, how is his present self showing up? She stops asking only, what could this become? And starts asking, what is this right now? That is wisdom. Because feminine energy becomes powerful when it can honor the spiritual without abandoning the practical. She can feel the soul bond and still see the behavior. She can trust the energy and still require action. She can believe in transformation and still refuse to live on promises that have not become real. This is the embodied feminine. She does not reject the unseen. She simply refuses to use the unseen to excuse what is unhealthy in the seen. And that clarity changes him because it no longer lets him live inside potential alone. He may feel that if he wants to be part of her life, he must meet her in reality. Not just dreams. Not just energy. Not just longing. Not just silent recognition. Reality. With words. With effort. With emotional maturity. With consistent presence. And if he cannot, she remains in her body and keeps living. That is her freedom. Because embodiment teaches her not to wait for energy to become action before she gives herself permission to exist fully. She exists now. She lives now. She nourishes herself now. She becomes beautiful to herself now. She returns to pleasure now. She begins again now. And from that place, she becomes less afraid of losing him. Because she is no longer losing herself. That is the true shift. The woman who is disconnected from her body fears absence because absence feels like a threat to her identity. The woman who is embodied can feel absence, grieve absence, honor absence, but she does not disappear inside it. She can hold longing without becoming longing. She can hold love without becoming pursuit. She can hold uncertainty without abandoning the present moment. That is emotional mastery. And it is deeply feminine. Not because it controls emotion, but because it allows emotion to move through the body without letting it steal her life. She may cry, but she returns to herself. She may miss him, but she still eats, sleeps, creates, and breathes. She may feel the energetic pull, but she does not let the pull drag her out of her own center. She may remember him, but she also remembers herself. That is the feminine energy shift that changes everything. For him, it changes the way he feels her. For her, it changes the way she feels herself. And the second part is more important, because her embodiment is not a performance for him to notice. It is a homecoming. She is not returning to her body, so he will awaken. She is returning because her body is where her life is. Her body is where her intuition speaks. Her body is where her pleasure lives. Her body is where her boundaries are felt. Her body is where her truth becomes undeniable. And when she lives there again, she becomes whole in a way chasing never allowed. This wholeness may become the very thing that makes him realize what has changed. He may sense that she is no longer mentally circling him. He may feel that her energy is not waiting at the edge of his silence. He may notice that her light has returned, but it is not pointed only at him. And that can awaken something in him. Because now he sees that her love was never the only thing that made her powerful. Her self-connection is what makes her powerful. Her ability to return to herself is what makes her powerful. Her refusal to abandon her body, her peace, her pleasure, and her life for his uncertainty is what makes her powerful. That is the woman he cannot forget. Not the one who chased. The one who came home. The one who remembered that her energy belongs inside her own body first. The one who stopped living as a reaction to him and started living as an expression of herself. That is the sacred truth of Chapter 5. When her energy returns to her body, the feminine energy shift becomes embodied. She stops living in anxious analysis, stops orbiting his silence, and returns to her breath. Intuition, sensuality, creativity, peace, and present life. Her energy becomes grounded, magnetic, and clear because it is no longer scattered across his uncertainty. And this changes him because he feels the difference. He no longer feels a woman chasing his attention. He feels a woman inhabiting her own life. He no longer feels a woman trying to pull him into clarity. He feels a woman who has become clear within herself. He no longer feels a woman waiting to be chosen. He feels a woman who is choosing to live. And whether he rises or not, she has already won something sacred. Herself. That is where Chapter 5 leaves us. With the understanding that the feminine energy that changes him forever is not only emotional, spiritual, or mental. It is embodied. It is the energy of a woman who has returned to her body, reclaimed her life force, and stopped making someone else's uncertainty the place where her own energy lives. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 6. Because next we are going deeper into how her self-respect exposes his avoidance, and why the moment she stops overgiving becomes the moment his lack of movement can no longer hide behind her effort. Chapter 6. How her self-respect exposes his avoidance. There comes a moment when her self-respect becomes a mirror. Not because she is trying to expose him, but because she has stopped covering for him. That is where this chapter begins. Because when the divine feminine is still overgiving, still explaining, still reaching, still waiting, and still carrying the emotional weight of the connection, the divine masculine may not fully see his own avoidance. Her movement can cover his stillness. Her effort can soften his absence. Her hope can keep the connection alive long enough for him to avoid asking whether he is truly participating. And this is one of the most painful truths of an imbalanced dynamic. Sometimes her love becomes the place where his avoidance hides. Not because she intends to enable him. Not because he consciously wants to hurt her. but because the pattern creates a structure where she keeps filling what he keeps leaving empty. He does not communicate, so she tries to understand. He withdraws, so she reaches. He gives mixed signals, so she searches for meaning. He stays emotionally unavailable, so she loves his potential even harder. And as long as she keeps doing that, his avoidance does not have to stand alone. It is cushioned by her effort. It is softened by her patience. It is disguised by her ability to see the deeper story. But when her self-respect rises, everything changes. She stops filling the empty spaces. She stops translating his silence into hidden love. She stops making excuses for inconsistency. She stops using her intuition to explain away what her body already knows is hurting her. And suddenly, his avoidance becomes visible. Not only to her, to him. Because when she stops overgiving, there is nothing left to hide the imbalance. The silence is just silence. The distance is just distance. The inconsistency is just inconsistency. The lack of movement is no longer covered by her emotional labor. That is why her self-respect can feel so confronting to him. Because it removes the illusion that everything is fine. Before, he may have been able to tell himself, she is still there, so maybe I have not really hurt her. He may have thought, she still reaches, so maybe the connection is still safe. He may have believed that because she kept forgiving, the emotional cost was not that serious. But when she chooses herself, the truth becomes louder. Her absence says, you did not meet me. Her boundary says, you cannot keep receiving without giving. Her peace says, I will no longer let your avoidance become my emotional assignment. Her self-respect says, I will not keep making your silence look like mystery. And that is powerful. Because avoidance often survives in vagueness. It survives in unclear conversations, unfinished feelings, half-promises, emotional distance. And the constant possibility that maybe one day things will become different. It survives when one person keeps holding the door open while the other remains undecided. But self-respect brings clarity. It says, this is what is happening. Not what could happen. Not what might happen if he heals. Not what his higher self may feel. Not what the connection could become someday. This. Right now. Is he showing up? Is he communicating? Is he consistent? Is he emotionally responsible? Is he meeting the love that is being offered? And when she begins asking those questions, the fantasy has less room to breathe. That does not mean the spiritual connection was false. It means spiritual connection cannot be used to excuse emotional absence forever. This is one of the deepest feminine awakenings. She realizes that seeing his potential does not mean she must live on potential. She realizes that understanding his wounds does not mean she must keep being wounded by them. She realizes that sensing his hidden feelings does not mean those feelings are enough to build safety. She realizes that love must eventually become behavior. And when she begins living from that truth, his avoidance is exposed. Because now, he cannot hide behind her hope. He cannot hide behind her explanations. He cannot hide behind the idea that she will keep holding space no matter how little he brings into that space. Her self-respect removes the emotional fog. It makes the dynamic simple. If he values her, he must show it. If he feels the connection, he must become honest about it. If he wants access to her softness, he must approach with care. If he wants love, he must become responsible enough to meet love in the real world. Not only in energy. Not only in silence. Not only in dreams, longing, or unspoken recognition. In reality. With presence. With words. With consistency. With the courage to stop disappearing into himself every time emotional truth asks him to mature. This is where the divine masculine may feel unsettled. Because her self-respect does not attack him, but it does remove his hiding place. He may feel that she is different. She is not chasing. She is not arguing. She is not trying to convince him. She is not offering unlimited access to her energy. And because she is no longer doing all that, he has to face what remains. His own lack of movement. His own fear. His own silence. His own emotional passivity. his own unwillingness to step into the connection with the same level of courage she once brought. That can be uncomfortable. And if he is not ready, he may react defensively. He may tell himself she changed too much. He may say she became cold. He may think she is punishing him. He may convince himself that if she really loved him, she would still be patient, still available, still reaching, still soft in the same old way. But that is the ego speaking. Because the ego often mistakes boundaries for rejection. The ego says, she pulled away from me. The truth says, she returned to herself. The ego says, she is not as loving anymore. The truth says, she is no longer overgiving. The ego says, she is making me feel guilty. The truth says, her self-respect is showing me what I have not wanted to face. That is the mirror. And if he is awakening, he will eventually feel that mirror. He will begin to realize that she did not become less loving. She became less available to imbalance. She did not become cold. She became clear. She did not stop caring. She stopped carrying what was never hers to carry alone. That realization can humble him deeply. Because now he may begin seeing the emotional labor she was doing while he remained hidden. He may remember how often she reached first. How often she tried to make sense of his distance. How often she softened her own needs so he would not feel pressured. How often she made room for his fear while quietly ignoring her own pain. And then he may see the contrast. She is no longer doing that. She is no longer holding the whole bridge. She is no longer standing in the middle of the connection, trying to pull him across. She has stepped back. And now the bridge requires him. That is what her self-respect exposes. It exposes whether he has the willingness to participate. Because a connection cannot become healthy when one person is always reaching and the other person is always deciding whether to respond. It cannot become mature when one person is emotionally brave and the other person remains emotionally protected. It cannot become sacred when one person keeps using spiritual depth to justify practical imbalance. Her self-respect says, no more. No more pretending one-sided effort is destiny. No more mistaking longing for love. No more calling hidden emotion enough. No more allowing potential to replace presence. This is not harsh. It is necessary. Because without self-respect, her love may become a place where avoidance never has to grow up. But with self-respect, love becomes honest. It says, I can love you, but I will not chase you. I can understand you, but I will not excuse repeated emotional absence. I can feel this bond, but I will not live in a bond that does not nourish my heart and reality. I can see your fear, but I will not let your fear rule my life. That is awakened feminine energy. And it changes the entire field. Because her self-respect does not demand that he change. It simply stops adapting to his refusal to change. That is a major difference. Demanding says, become who I need you to be. Self-respect says, I will no longer abandon who I am. Demanding tries to control his behavior. Self-respect controls her own access. Demanding waits for him to finally understand. Self-respect acts from what she already understands. This is why her energy becomes so strong. She is not fighting him. She is not begging him. She is not trying to force him into responsibility. She is simply no longer participating in the version of the dynamic where he gets to avoid responsibility and still receive her energy as if nothing has happened. That is what exposes him. Because once she stops adjusting herself around his avoidance, he has to see the avoidance directly. He can no longer say the problem is her intensity if she is calm. He can no longer say the problem is her chasing if she is not chasing. He can no longer say the problem is her emotional expression if she is simply standing in quiet self-respect. So what remains? His fear. His passivity. His lack of clarity. His inability or unwillingness to meet the connection with presence. And if he is honest, he may realize. She was not asking for too much. She was asking for truth. She was not trying to control me. She was trying to understand where she stood. She was not pressuring me by needing consistency. She was asking for the emotional safety love requires. This kind of realization can change a man. because it moves him from defensiveness into accountability. He begins to understand that her needs were not the enemy. Her boundaries were not a threat. Her desire for clarity was not a cage. Her self-respect is not cruelty. It is the natural response of a woman who has learned that love without reciprocity becomes pain. And now, he has to decide what he does with that understanding. Will he rise? Or will he retreat further into pride? Will he become honest? Or will he label her clarity as rejection? Will he finally meet the connection? Or will he prove that her self-respect was necessary? This is the choice her energy creates. Not by force, by truth. And this is why Chapter 6 is so important. Because the feminine energy shift does not only make her more magnetic, it also makes the truth of the dynamic more visible. Her self-respect is like turning on the light in a room where both people had been feeling their way through the dark. Suddenly, everything can be seen. The places where she overgave, the places where he avoided, the places where the connection was carried by hope instead of mutual action, the places where love was real, but the structure was not healthy. And once the light is on, neither person can pretend in the same way. She can no longer pretend she is at peace with receiving less than she needs. He can no longer pretend his silence has no impact. She can no longer pretend that understanding him means abandoning herself. He can no longer pretend that being afraid excuses never communicating. The truth is visible now, and visibility changes everything. For the divine feminine, this may feel empowering but also painful. Because when her self-respect exposes his avoidance, she may have to face the reality she once tried to soften. She may have to admit that he was not showing up. She may have to admit that the connection was not balanced. She may have to admit that love by itself was not enough to create safety. This can hurt, but it also frees her. Because as long as she kept covering for him, she also kept herself trapped in the hope that if she just loved better, explained better, waited better, or understood more deeply, the pattern would change. But now she sees. The pattern changes when I stop feeding it. The pattern changes when I stop doing both parts. The pattern changes when I stop making my energy available to a version of love that does not meet me back. That is not giving up. That is waking up. And the more she wakes up, the less available she becomes for confusion. Her heart may still be open, but her access changes. Her compassion may still exist, but her standards rise. Her love may still be real, but it no longer comes without discernment. This is what makes her energy impossible to handle casually. Because she is no longer someone who can be kept in emotional limbo with a little warmth and a lot of silence. She is no longer someone who will accept potential as proof. She is no longer someone who will translate avoidance into romance. She is no longer someone who will keep calling inconsistency a spiritual test when her body is asking for peace. She has become honest. And honesty is magnetic to what is mature, but confronting to what is avoidant. That is why he may feel drawn and challenged at the same time. Drawn to her groundedness. Challenged by her clarity. Drawn to her softness. Challenged by her boundaries. Drawn to the woman she has become. Challenged by the fact that he can no longer access her through the same old pattern. This is the moment he may realize that if he wants to be near her, he must become more honest with himself. He must ask, why did I stay silent? Why did I let her carry so much? Why did I avoid clarity? Why did I receive her love without learning how to return it with maturity? Why did it take her choosing herself for me to see what I was not choosing? These questions are part of his awakening. But again, they belong to him. She does not need to force them. She does not need to guide him through them. She does not need to soften every realization he has. Because one of the ways her self-respect remains strong is by allowing him to feel the consequences of what is being revealed. Not as punishment, as reality. If he feels regret, he must process it. If he feels longing, he must understand it. If he feels exposed, he must ask what his avoidance was hiding. If he feels called to rise, he must rise from his own choice. That is how masculine responsibility develops. Not by being carried, by being invited into truth and choosing to meet it. And if he does not choose to meet it, her self-respect continues to protect her. That is the beauty of this shift. It serves both possibilities. If he awakens, her self-respect has invited him into a higher version of himself. If he does not awaken, her self-respect has prevented her from continuing to lose herself inside his avoidance. Either way, she wins herself back. And that is the deeper purpose. Because the feminine energy shift that changes him forever is not a performance designed around his transformation. It is the natural result of her own transformation. She stops overgiving because she has learned the cost. She stops chasing because she has returned to her center. She stops explaining because she knows her worth. She sets boundaries because her softness is sacred. She chooses peace because her nervous system matters. And from that place, his avoidance can no longer hide. It stands in the open. And what is exposed must either be healed or repeated consciously. That is the turning point. He can no longer say he does not know. He can no longer hide behind her effort. He can no longer receive from her without seeing what his lack of reciprocity creates. Her self-respect has shown him. Now he must choose. And she must continue choosing herself. That is the sacred truth of Chapter 6. Her self-respect exposes his avoidance because it removes the emotional labor that once covered it. When she stops overgiving, explaining, translating, waiting, and softening his silence, his lack of movement becomes visible. Her grounded energy reveals the places where he has been passive, unclear, afraid, or unwilling to meet the connection with maturity. But this exposure is not an attack. It is truth. And truth gives him an invitation. To grow. To communicate. To become responsible. To stop using her love as a hiding place. And truth gives her an invitation too. To remain aligned. To stop covering for what hurts. To love without losing herself. To protect the softness she worked so hard to reclaim. That is where Chapter 6 leaves us. With the understanding that her self-respect does not just change how he sees her. It changes what can no longer be hidden. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 7. Because next we are going deeper into the moment he realizes she is no longer the same woman. And why that realization may become the moment he finally understands that the old version of the connection is gone. Chapter 7. The moment he realizes she is no longer the same woman. There comes a moment when he realizes she is no longer the same woman. Not because her heart became cold. Not because her love was fake. Not because the connection suddenly meant nothing to her. But because the version of her who once chased, overgave, overexplained, waited in pain, and tried to love him into awakening has finally begun to disappear. That is where this chapter begins. Because for a long time, the divine masculine may have known her through the old pattern. He may have known the version of her who reached first. The version who tried to understand his silence. The version who kept seeing the best in him, even when his actions did not consistently reflect that best. The version who softened the emotional space every time he made it tense with distance. He may have known the woman who kept the door open. The woman who explained her heart. The woman who forgave before he fully understood what he had done. The woman who could feel his hidden emotions and tried to hold space for them. The woman who kept believing in the man beneath the mask. And maybe in some quiet way he loved that about her. Maybe he felt comfort in her softness. Maybe he felt seen by her patience. Maybe he felt safe knowing she could sense his deeper self. Maybe he felt reassured by the fact that even when he was uncertain, she still seemed to know. But then her energy changes. And he feels it. She is still soft, but not available in the same way. She is still kind, but not overextending. She still has love, but that love is no longer separated from self-respect. She can still feel the connection, but she is no longer willing to abandon her peace to keep proving it. This is the moment he realizes she is no longer the same woman. And it can shake him deeply. Because the old version of her gave him room to remain the old version of himself. Her over-explaining gave him time to avoid finding his own words. Her reaching gave him room to stay passive. Her patience gave him room to delay. Her emotional labor gave him room to not fully carry his own. But the woman standing in front of him now is different. She is no longer waiting at the edge of his silence. She is no longer making herself smaller, so his fear feels bigger than her needs. She is no longer treating his potential as if it were the same as presence. She is no longer offering unlimited access to her softness while receiving uncertainty in return. And this means he cannot approach her through the old doorway anymore. The old doorway was opened by her hope. The new doorway is guarded by her self-respect. That does not mean she is closed. It means the entrance has changed. Now truth is required. Presence is required. Emotional maturity is required. Not perfection, not flawless confidence, not all the answers, but realness. He cannot return with vague energy and expect her to fill in the blanks. He cannot send one small signal and expect her to build a whole story around it. He cannot offer a little warmth and expect her to reopen the parts of herself she worked so hard to heal. Because she is not the same woman. And the old methods no longer work. This realization can be uncomfortable for him because it forces him to understand that time did not only affect him. It affected her too. While he was silent, she was learning. While he was distant, she was growing. While he was avoiding, she was awakening. While he was trying not to feel, she was learning how to feel herself again. She did not stay frozen in the version of herself that loved him through self-abandonment. She evolved. And that evolution carries a different frequency. He may see it in the way she no longer rushes to respond. He may feel it in the way her words are fewer but clearer. He may notice it in the way she does not try to pull meaning out of his half-efforts. He may sense it in the calmness that surrounds her now. A calmness that does not depend on whether he moves closer or stays away. This calmness may unsettle him. Because before, her emotional world may have seemed more visibly connected to him. If he moved away, she reached. If he went quiet, she tried to understand. If he gave a little, she softened. He may have felt the impact he had on her, because her energy responded so clearly to his presence and absence. But now she is more anchored. He still matters, perhaps. But he is no longer the center. That is a powerful shift. Because when a woman stops making a man the center of her emotional universe, he feels the space where her energy used to orbit him. He feels that her life is no longer suspended in the question of whether he will choose her. He feels that she has begun choosing her own peace, her own body, her own dreams, her own rhythm. And if his soul recognizes her, this may awaken both respect and grief. Respect because she has become stronger. Grief because he realizes he may have lost access to the version of her who once made it easy for him to remain hidden. But that version had to go. Not because she was wrong, but because she was tired. Tired of being the emotional bridge. Tired of loving potential more than reality. Tired of translating silence into meaning. Tired of softening herself around someone else's unreadiness. Tired of making her nervous system pay the price for his avoidance. So she changed. She did not change into someone bitter. She changed into someone awake. And an awake woman cannot be loved unconsciously in the same way. That is what he begins to realize. He may have expected that if he returned, she would respond like before. He may have expected the same softness without the same standards. The same warmth without the same questions. The same access without the same responsibility. The same open door without needing to explain what he is bringing through it. But now, her energy asks something different. It asks, have you changed too? Have you reflected? Have you become honest? Have you learned how to meet what you once avoided? Have you come back because you are ready to honor this? Or because you miss the version of me that carried your uncertainty? These questions may not be spoken out loud, but he feels them. Because a woman's energy speaks. Her boundaries speak. Her calm speaks. Her stillness speaks. Her refusal to chase speaks. Her ability to love herself speaks. And now, the question is no longer only whether she loves him. The question is whether he can meet the woman she has become. That is a much higher question. Because the woman she has become is not asking for emotional performance. She is not asking him to pretend he is healed. She is not asking him to have everything figured out. She is not asking for perfect masculine certainty. But she is asking for honesty. She is asking for consistency. She is asking for responsibility. She is asking for the maturity to stop making his fear the ruler of the connection. And if he cannot bring that, then he may feel her slipping away not because she lacks love, but because she no longer lacks self-respect. This difference matters. A woman without love leaves because she feels nothing. A woman with self-respect leaves because she finally feels herself. And he may begin to understand that. He may realize that her distance is not the emptiness of someone who never cared. It is the clarity of someone who cared deeply and learned where caring without reciprocity led her. He may realize that her silence is not revenge. It is rest. He may realize that her boundaries are not walls built to punish him. They are sacred lines drawn to protect the softness he once knew too casually. This can awaken sadness in him, because now he sees that the woman who once gave endlessly had a limit. Not because her love was small, because her soul was calling her back. And maybe he did not believe she would actually return to herself. Maybe he felt her pain, but assumed her hope would keep her close. Maybe he knew she loved deeply and confused that depth with endless availability. Maybe he thought that because she understood him, she would always make room for his lack of readiness. But the awakened feminine understands something the wounded feminine did not. Understanding someone does not mean endlessly making space for what hurts. Seeing his soul does not mean ignoring his behavior. Feeling the bond does not mean sacrificing her body, her peace, her dignity, or her future. And once she understands that, she becomes different. She becomes harder to manipulate through potential. Harder to pull back with small signs. Harder to keep in emotional limbo. Harder to access without real presence. Not because she is hardened, because she is integrated. Her heart and her boundaries now speak the same language. Before, her heart may have said, "I love him," while her boundaries said nothing. Before, her soul may have said, "This is deep," while her nervous system said, "This hurts," and she did not know which voice to trust. Before, her compassion may have kept overriding her self-protection. Now she can hold all truths at once. Yes, I may love him. Yes, I may feel the connection. Yes, I may understand his fear. And yes, I still choose peace. That is integration. And integration is powerful because it makes her energy coherent. No more contradiction between what she knows and how she lives. No more saying she deserves reciprocity while giving endlessly to absence. No more saying she values truth while accepting ambiguity. No more saying her energy is sacred while pouring it into silence that does not meet her. She begins living in alignment. And that alignment changes how he sees her. Because the divine masculine may have first been drawn to her softness, but now he is confronted by her sovereignty. He may have first felt her warmth, but now he feels her power. He may have first received her love, but now he must face the truth that her love can no longer be separated from her dignity. This is the woman who changes him forever. Not because she demands transformation, but because her transformation demands truth from the field. Her energy no longer supports the old version of the connection. It no longer supports the chase. It no longer supports the imbalance. It no longer supports the fantasy where hidden feelings are enough and visible effort is optional. Her energy says, "Meet me in reality. Meet me with truth. Meet me as a man who has looked at himself. Or let me continue walking in peace." That is not cruelty. That is clarity. And clarity can feel like a shock to someone who is used to being met by her hope. He may feel the difference and wonder where the old version went. But the truth is, the old version did not disappear overnight. She was slowly being transformed by every silence she had to sit through. Every moment she overexplained and still felt unheard. Every time she gave compassion and received confusion. Every night she asked herself why loving him felt like losing herself. Her transformation was not sudden. It was built. Built from pain. Built from reflection. Built from the exhaustion of chasing. Built from the quiet strength it took to stop. Built from the sacred decision to no longer abandon herself. So when he realizes she is not the same woman, he is not only seeing a new version of her. He is seeing the result of what the old dynamic created. That can be a difficult mirror. Because he may understand that his absence played a role in her awakening. His silence made her listen to herself. His distance made her find her own ground. His uncertainty made her stop negotiating with confusion. His avoidance made her realize she could no longer keep making someone else's growth more important than her own. And that realization can bring regret. Because he may think, she changed because she had to. She became stronger because I was not safe enough for her softness. She stopped chasing because I did not meet her when she was still reaching. She became quiet because I did not honor her voice when she used it. These thoughts can humble him if he is ready to face them. But they can also trigger his ego if he is not. The ego may say, she is different now. She is cold. The soul may say, she is different because she healed. The ego may say, she is not as loving as before. The soul may say, she is no longer abandoning herself in order to love. The ego may say, she changed on me. The soul may ask, did you expect her to stay wounded so you could stay comfortable? That question is sharp. But it is true. Because sometimes, the divine masculine may unconsciously prefer the version of her that was easier to access. The version who responded quickly. The version who explained. The version who tried to understand everything. The version who kept the emotional door open even when he had not earned that access with consistency. But that version was in pain. And if he truly loves her, he must not want her to return to the version of herself that was abandoning her peace. He must learn to love the woman who is whole. Not only the woman who is available. That is a deeper masculine lesson. Can he love her sovereignty, not just her softness? Can he respect her boundaries, not just enjoy her warmth? Can he meet her clarity, not just miss her overgiving? Can he honor her evolution, even if that evolution means he no longer receives access the way he once did? These questions reveal whether his love is maturing. Because immature love wants the old access back. Mature love respects the woman she became while healing from the old dynamic. Immature love says, come back to how you were. Mature love says, I see why you had to become who you are. Immature love misses the version that gave endlessly. Mature love honors the version that finally chose herself. This is where he is invited to grow. Her transformation becomes his initiation. He must decide whether he wants to remain attached to the woman who chased, or rise to meet the woman who receives. He must decide whether he wants the comfort of her old self-abandonment, or the truth of her new self-respect. He must decide whether he is drawn to her because she once made him feel powerful, or because her power now calls him into his own. That is the sacred invitation. Because a healed feminine does not emasculate the masculine. She invites him into higher masculinity. Her self-respect invites his responsibility. Her clarity invites his honesty. Her boundaries invite his integrity. Her stillness invites his real movement. Her wholeness invites his maturity. But he has to choose. She cannot choose for him. And this is where the divine feminine must stay grounded. Because when he realizes she is different, he may test the new energy. He may try to see whether the old version is still accessible. He may send a small sign, a light message, a vague gesture, or an emotional hint to see if she will return to the old pattern. This is where she must remember who she has become. She can be kind, but she does not need to overfunction. She can be open, but she does not need to abandon discernment. She can listen, but she does not need to fill the silence for him. She can feel love, but she does not need to become the old version of herself to prove it. That version served her until she learned. Now she honors the lesson by living differently. She does not punish him for the past, but she does not re-enter the past either. That is the balance. Because her transformation must be embodied, not only declared. It must show up in how she responds, how she pauses, how she protects her energy, how she waits to see consistency before reopening trust. If she says she has changed but returns immediately to over-explaining, overgiving, and decoding, then the old pattern has not truly ended. But if she remains centered, the new dynamic has a chance to reveal itself. Either he rises to meet her, or he reveals that he was only attached to the old version. Both outcomes bring truth. And truth is the gift. Because she no longer needs to wonder. She no longer needs to chase potential. She no longer needs to make excuses for energy that cannot meet her in reality. She can let the truth show itself. This is why her transformation is so powerful. She does not have to force a decision. She becomes the decision. Her energy says, I am no longer available for the old cycle. I am no longer the woman who chases silence. I am no longer the woman who gives access without responsibility. I am no longer the woman who abandons herself to keep a connection alive. That woman taught me. But she is not who I am anymore. And when he realizes this, he may feel the weight of time. The time he spent avoiding. The time he spent assuming she would stay. The time he spent letting her carry the emotional field. The time he spent delaying his own honesty. He may begin to understand that while he was waiting to feel ready, she was becoming someone who no longer waits in the same way. This is the cost of masculine delay. Sometimes, by the time he realizes the value of what she offered, she has already grown beyond the version of herself that offered it without boundaries. And that does not mean love is impossible. But it does mean love must be new. It cannot return to the old shape. It cannot be built on old silence, old chasing, old overgiving, old emotional labor, or old imbalance. If anything rises now, it must rise from a new foundation. A foundation of truth. A foundation of reciprocity. A foundation where she remains whole, and he becomes responsible. A foundation where her softness is protected and his masculinity is awakened enough to protect it too. That is the possibility. But the possibility only opens if both are willing to meet the new energy. She must not betray her transformation to recover the past. He must not expect her transformation to bend around his comfort. Both must become honest. And if that happens, the connection can evolve. Not backward. Forward. Not into the old cycle. Into a more conscious dynamic. But if he cannot meet the new version of her, then her transformation becomes her freedom. Because she has outgrown the version of love that required her to shrink. She has outgrown the waiting room. She has outgrown the chase. She has outgrown the belief that her worth becomes real only when he recognizes it. And that is something to celebrate. Because the moment he realizes she is no longer the same woman is also the moment she realizes she does not need to become the old woman again. That is her victory. Quiet, sacred, powerful. She may still have tenderness, but now it lives inside truth. She may still have love, but now it lives with boundaries. She may still have hope, but now it no longer costs her peace. That is the feminine energy shift that changes everything. It changes him because he can no longer take her old availability for granted. It changes her because she can no longer return to self-abandonment and call it love. It changes the connection because the old pattern has lost its home. That is the sacred truth of Chapter 7. The moment he realizes she is no longer the same woman is the moment he sees that the old version of the connection is gone. She may still care, but she is no longer chasing. She may still be soft, but she is protected by boundaries. She may still feel the bond, but she no longer sacrifices her peace to keep it alive. And now he must decide whether he can meet the woman she has become. Not the woman who overgave. Not the woman who waited in pain. Not the woman who made his potential more important than her reality. But the woman who returned to herself. And if he is ready, this realization can change him forever. Because it invites him to become a man who can meet her in truth. And if he is not ready, it still changes her forever. Because she has finally become a woman who will not abandon herself to be loved. That is where Chapter 7 leaves us. With the understanding that her transformation is not a performance. It is a homecoming. And once a woman has truly come home to herself, the old version of her cannot be summoned back by the same energy that made her leave. If this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 8. Because next we are going deeper into why this shift awakens his masculine responsibility, and how her new energy no longer invites passivity, but calls him into honesty, courage, and real emotional maturity. Chapter 8. Why this shift awakens his masculine responsibility. There is a feminine energy that does not chase the masculine. It calls him higher. That is where this chapter begins. Because when the divine feminine shifts from chasing to receiving, from over-explaining to knowing, from unprotected softness to softness with boundaries, from wounded silence to empowered peace, from anxious thinking to embodied presence. She changes the entire energetic structure of the connection. She is no longer inviting him into the old pattern. She is no longer saying, "I will carry this until you are ready." She is no longer saying, "I will explain my heart until you finally understand." She is no longer saying, "I will soften every consequence of your avoidance so you never have to feel the full weight of your absence." Her energy begins to say something different. It says, "Meet me in truth. Meet me in presence. Meet me in emotional maturity. Meet me as a man who is willing to take responsibility for what he feels, what he avoids, and what he creates in the space between us." That is why this shift awakens his masculine responsibility. Because awakened feminine energy does not invite passivity. It invites presence. It does not invite him to hide behind her effort. It invites him to bring effort of his own. It does not invite him to receive love without accountability. It invites him to become accountable enough to honor the love he receives. This is the deeper polarity. When she is chasing, the energy becomes reversed. She becomes the one pursuing, initiating, holding, explaining, trying to pull the connection forward. He becomes the one responding, delaying, observing, receiving, retreating, or deciding whether to engage. But when she returns to her feminine center, she stops doing his part. She stops occupying the energetic space that belongs to masculine movement. And suddenly, there is room for him to feel his own responsibility. This can be uncomfortable for him. Because before, her effort kept the connection moving even when he was still. Her reaching kept the door open even when he was silent. Her understanding created emotional warmth even when he was not offering clarity. Her belief in his potential helped him feel seen, even when he was not showing up in reality. But now the old support has been removed. Not cruelly, truthfully. And in that truth, he has to ask himself, what am I bringing? Am I participating? Am I communicating? Am I honoring her heart with action, or only feeling something privately? Am I using her love as a place to hide from my own courage? These questions are the beginning of masculine responsibility. Because masculine responsibility is not only about providing, protecting, or taking action in the outer world. At the deeper spiritual level, masculine responsibility is the willingness to bring consciousness into the emotional field. It is the willingness to stop letting fear create confusion. It is the willingness to communicate honestly instead of disappearing. It is the willingness to lead himself through discomfort instead of making the feminine carry the consequences of his avoidance. That is a mature masculine energy. A man in mature masculine responsibility does not need the feminine to chase him into truth. He recognizes truth and moves toward it. He does not need her to explain 10 times why silence hurts. He becomes aware that silence has impact. He does not need her to exhaust herself proving her love. He learns to honor love while it is present. He does not need her to become anxious before he offers clarity. He brings clarity because he values peace. This is what her shift invites him into. Not through pressure, through contrast. Her new energy contrasts with his old behavior. Her groundedness reveals his avoidance. Her self-respect reveals where he lacks emotional responsibility. Her stillness reveals whether he has learned to move. Her boundaries reveal whether he can respect a woman's heart without needing her to keep overgiving. And that contrast can awaken him, because he begins to feel that the old way no longer works. He cannot keep giving half signals and expect full access. He cannot keep hiding behind silence and expect her to keep interpreting. He cannot keep leaning on her softness without becoming safe for it. He cannot keep receiving her presence without offering presence in return. Her energy now requires him to become more conscious. Not because she demands it with force, but because her self-respect has changed the terms of access. This is where he may begin to feel the difference between wanting her and being ready to meet her. He may want her energy. He may miss her warmth. He may remember the old version of her with longing. He may feel drawn to the woman she has become. But masculine responsibility asks, can you meet her? Can you bring honesty? Can you bring emotional steadiness? Can you bring clarity without waiting for her to pull it out of you? Can you protect the softness you say you miss? This question is where many men are tested. Because longing can be passive. Responsibility is active. Missing her can happen in silence. Meeting her requires courage. Feeling the connection can remain hidden. Honoring the connection requires a choice. And the feminine energy shift makes this difference impossible to ignore. Because she no longer treats hidden feelings as enough. She no longer lets potential replace presence. She no longer allows his private emotions to become the substitute for public maturity. She does not ask him to be perfect. But she does ask the field to become honest. And honesty asks him to rise. This is where the masculine may feel a sacred pressure. Not the pressure of her chasing. The pressure of his own soul. The pressure that says, you know this matters. You know you have been hiding. You know she is not the same woman. You know the old pattern cannot receive the new version of her. You know that if you want to stand near her now, you cannot come with the same avoidance that made her choose herself in the first place. That pressure can awaken him because it comes from within. Her energy no longer pushes. His truth begins pulling. And that is the difference. When she pushed, he could resist her. When truth pulls from inside him, he must face himself. That is why this feminine energy shift is so powerful. It does not try to control him. It stops controlling, stops chasing, stops managing, stops explaining. And in that space, whatever is real inside him begins to rise on its own. If he has love, he must feel it. If he has regret, he must face it. If he has fear, he must understand it. If he has responsibility, he must choose whether to embody it. Her shift does not create responsibility in him from nothing. It reveals whether he is ready to claim the responsibility that was always his. Because a conscious connection cannot be held by one person. It must be met by two. Her role is not to pull him into manhood. His role is to meet his own manhood and bring it to the connection. Her role is not to keep proving she is worthy of effort. His role is to become the kind of man who recognizes worth without needing it to beg. Her role is not to soften every hard truth so he can avoid discomfort. His role is to develop the strength to face truth without running. This is the awakening of masculine responsibility. And it may begin quietly. He may begin seeing himself more clearly. He may notice how often he waits for her to create the opening. He may notice how he relies on her softness to repair what his silence breaks. He may notice how he wants the comfort of her energy, but resists the vulnerability required to earn trust. He may begin asking himself, why did I let her carry so much? Why did I stay passive while she kept reaching? Why did I receive her love without learning how to protect it? Why did I confuse her patience with permission to delay my own growth? These questions are not easy. But they are necessary. Because responsibility begins when he stops making his fear the explanation for everything and starts making his truth the foundation for change. He may have been afraid, but fear does not erase impact. He may have been overwhelmed, but overwhelm does not make silence harmless. He may have been unsure, but uncertainty does not justify keeping another heart emotionally suspended. He may have needed time. But time without communication can become abandonment to the person waiting for clarity. This is what masculine responsibility begins to understand. It understands that love is not only about intention. It is about impact. It is not only about what he feels. It is about how he handles what he feels. It is not only about his fear. It is about whether he lets fear create confusion for someone who trusted him. That awareness can mature him. Because now he sees that emotional responsibility is not weakness. It is leadership, not control. Leadership. The kind of leadership where a man leads himself first. He leads himself out of avoidance. He leads himself through fear. He leads himself into honesty. He leads himself to communicate before silence becomes damage. He leads himself to protect the emotional space instead of leaving the feminine to clean up what his absence creates. This is mature masculine leadership. It does not dominate. It brings clarity. It does not control the feminine. It creates safety with truth. It does not demand her softness. It becomes worthy of receiving it. And this is why her shift activates him. Because her new feminine energy requires a new masculine response. The old response was distance. The old response was silence. The old response was vague warmth and then withdrawal. The old response was letting her do the emotional work. But the new energy cannot be met that way. The new energy says, if you come, come with truth. If you speak, speak with responsibility. If you miss me, understand what you miss. If you want my softness, become safe enough for it. And if you cannot, I will not chase you into becoming ready. That is a sacred invitation. It is not rejection. It is not punishment. It is the doorway into a higher dynamic. A dynamic where the masculine does not wait to be rescued from his own silence. A dynamic where the feminine does not overgive to compensate for his fear. A dynamic where both people are responsible for the love between them. This is what changes him forever if he is ready. He begins to understand that love is not something he can stand near without participating in. He begins to realize that a woman's emotional availability is not something to consume while remaining undecided. He begins to see that if he wants an awakened feminine, he must bring awakened masculine energy. An awakened masculine energy is not loud. It is not controlling. It is not performative. It is accountable. It says, I see my part. I understand what my silence created. I know I cannot return with the same energy. I am willing to be honest, even if I do not have everything figured out. I am willing to stop making you carry what belongs to me. That kind of masculine energy is rare because it requires humility. And humility is the bridge between awareness and responsibility. Without humility, he may react to her shift with ego. He may say she changed. He may say she is cold. He may say she is not as open as before. He may say she is making things difficult. But humility asks a different question. Did she change because she had to protect herself from my inconsistency? Did her silence become necessary because I did not honor her voice? Did her boundaries rise because I kept treating her softness as endless? Did her energy pull back because I was receiving more than I was giving? These questions can break through the ego. And if he allows them, they can open his heart. Because now he is no longer only seeing her transformation. He is seeing why it was necessary. That is when masculine responsibility becomes more than wanting her back. It becomes wanting to become better. Not better to manipulate her. Not better to regain access. Better because he has seen the truth of who he has been and who he is being called to become. That is the deepest awakening. A man changes forever not when he fears losing her, but when he realizes he does not want to be the kind of man who makes a woman lose herself. He does not want to be the man who needs to be chased. He does not want to be the man who receives love passively. He does not want to be the man who waits until a woman is exhausted before he recognizes her value. He does not want to be the man whose silence becomes someone else's pain. That realization can change the direction of his life. Because now, her shift has awakened a mirror of his own masculine integrity. He begins to ask, what kind of man am I becoming? Can I protect what is sacred? Can I communicate through discomfort? Can I meet a woman in her power without needing her to shrink back into chasing? Can I honor a love that no longer begs for me, but invites me to rise? These questions are the birth of higher masculine responsibility. And if he follows them, he may begin to move differently. He may speak with more clarity. He may take more ownership. He may stop sending vague signals. He may stop expecting her to interpret his silence. He may begin approaching with respect for the woman she has become. He may understand that if he returns, he must return not to restart the old dynamic, but to meet a new one. And that requires him to become new too. Because he cannot bring old avoidance into her new self-respect. He cannot bring old silence into her new clarity. He cannot bring old emotional passivity into her new feminine embodiment. He cannot bring old entitlement into her protected softness. If he wants to meet her, he must meet her as the man who has looked inward. A man who understands that responsibility is not pressure. It is love in action. That phrase matters. Responsibility is love in action. Because love without responsibility remains a feeling. Responsibility makes love safe. Responsibility gives love a body. Responsibility turns hidden emotion into visible care. Responsibility turns longing into communication. Responsibility turns regret into changed behavior. That is what he must learn. And her feminine shift teaches it without chasing him. It teaches by contrast. It teaches by absence. It teaches by boundary. It teaches by embodied self-worth. It teaches by no longer feeding the version of him that refuses to grow. This is why her energy can change him forever. Because it does not allow him to remain comfortable inside immaturity. It does not shame him. But it does not cushion him. It does not attack him. But it does not excuse him. It does not demand that he become ready. But it also does not reward his unreadiness with unlimited access. This is conscious feminine energy. It is loving. But it is truthful. It is open. But it is discerning. It is soft. But it is no longer sacrificial. And when the masculine meets this energy, he is confronted with a choice. Rise or remain. Grow or repeat. Speak or stay hidden. Honor her or lose access to the version of love that once reached for him without boundaries. That choice is his. And for the divine feminine, this chapter carries a message too. Your shift may awaken his masculine responsibility. But you are not responsible for making him responsible. Read that again. You are not responsible for making him responsible. You can create space. You can embody self-respect. You can stop chasing. You can protect your softness. You can live in your truth. But you cannot force him to rise. You cannot carry his courage. You cannot communicate for him. You cannot turn his hidden feelings into mature action through your own effort. That belongs to him. Your task is to remain in alignment, not to monitor whether your alignment is working on him. Because if you shift only to make him change, you are still chasing in a new form. True feminine energy shift is not a performance for masculine awakening. It is a devotion to your own wholeness. If he awakens, beautiful. If he does not, your wholeness remains. That is the freedom. Because the awakened feminine no longer builds her life around whether the masculine accepts the invitation. She offers the invitation through her energy, her standards, her presence, and her self-respect. But she does not collapse if he cannot meet it. She trusts that whatever cannot meet her in truth is not allowed to keep consuming her in confusion. That is sacred self-love. And from that place, she becomes even more powerful. Because she is no longer afraid of his choice. She is more committed to her own. She chooses peace. She chooses clarity. She chooses love that can be embodied. She chooses not to abandon herself while someone else decides whether to grow. This is the feminine shift that changes everything. It changes him if he is ready because it invites his masculine responsibility to awaken. It changes her regardless because she no longer waits for his responsibility to become her permission to live. That is the sacred truth of Chapter 8. This shift awakens his masculine responsibility because her energy no longer supports passivity. She stops chasing, over-explaining, over-giving, and carrying the emotional labor. Her grounded feminine presence creates a mirror where he must decide whether he will bring truth, clarity, emotional maturity, and action. Her self-respect calls him higher, not by force, but by refusing to participate in the old imbalance. And if he accepts that invitation, he begins to become the man who can meet her. Not through control, through integrity, not through promises, through consistency, not through hidden feelings, through responsible love. But if he does not accept it, she still remains whole. Because the point of her shift was never to make him become a man. The point was to stop losing herself while waiting for him to become one. That is where Chapter 8 leaves us. With the understanding that awakened feminine energy does not chase masculine responsibility. It invites it. And whether he rises or not, she continues walking in the truth of who she has become. If this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 9. Because next we are going deeper into the difference between magnetic feminine energy and emotional overgiving. And why true magnetism is not about doing more for love. It is about becoming so rooted in yourself that love can finally meet you without you having to chase it. Chapter 9. The difference between magnetic feminine energy and emotional overgiving. There is a kind of feminine energy that feels magnetic, and there is a kind of feminine energy that feels exhausted. They can look similar from the outside. Both may be loving. Both may be generous. Both may be warm. Both may care deeply. Both may want the connection to grow, heal, and become something real. But the energy underneath is completely different. That is where this chapter begins. Because the feminine energy that changes him forever is not emotional overgiving. It is true feminine magnetism. And the difference between the two is everything. Emotional overgiving says, I will keep pouring until you finally see me. Magnetic feminine energy says, I am already whole, and what is meant for me can meet me here. Emotional overgiving says, I must prove my love. Magnetic feminine energy says, my love is sacred, and it does not need to be performed for someone who is not ready to honor it. Emotional overgiving says, if I give more, maybe he will awaken. Magnetic feminine energy says, his awakening belongs to him. My alignment belongs to me. This is the shift. And it changes the entire dynamic. Because for a long time, the divine feminine may have mistaken overgiving for love. She may have believed that if her heart was truly open, she should give endlessly. She should understand more, wait longer, forgive faster, explain deeper, hold more space, soften more pain, keep the energetic door open, even when her own body was asking for rest. But over time, she begins to feel the difference. Love feels alive. Overgiving feels draining. Love feels expansive. Overgiving feels anxious. Love feels rooted in truth. Overgiving feels rooted in fear. Love says, I am giving because my heart is full. Overgiving says, I am giving because I am afraid of what happens if I stop. That is the difference. And the body knows. Her body knows when she is giving from overflow. It feels calm, open, warm, and peaceful. She can give without secretly needing the gift to become a guarantee. She can love without waiting for immediate proof. She can be kind without feeling like she has betrayed herself. But when she is overgiving, her body tightens. She feels anxious after sending the message. She checks whether he responded. She wonders if she said too much. She feels exposed, depleted, and uncertain. She gives, but underneath the giving is a silent plea. Please choose me now. Please understand now. Please stop being distant now. That is not magnetism. That is fear trying to become love. And she does not need to shame herself for it. Because often, overgiving begins as a survival strategy. It may come from old wounds, from childhood patterns, from having to earn affection, from learning that love was something she had to work for, prove, chase, or maintain through emotional labor. It may come from being the one who always understood, always adjusted, always sensed the room, always became what others needed, so she would not be abandoned. So when the divine masculine pulls away, that old wound wakes up. The part of her that fears losing love begins to work harder. She gives more. She explains more. She waits more. She becomes more patient than her nervous system can handle. She becomes more forgiving than her boundaries can support. And she may call it devotion, but her body calls it exhaustion. This is where the awakening begins. She starts realizing that true feminine magnetism does not come from doing more. It comes from being more deeply connected to herself. It comes from her ability to remain in her own center. It comes from the way she breathes, lives, creates, rests, and trusts herself. It comes from the quiet confidence of a woman who no longer abandons her own energy to convince someone else of her worth. Magnetic feminine energy is not loud. It does not beg. It does not perform. It does not chase. It does not compete. It does not over-explain. It does not keep pouring into silence to prove how much it cares. It simply radiates from fullness. And fullness is very different from overextension. A woman in overgiving may appear loving, but she is leaking energy. Her attention is scattered. Her nervous system is activated. Her mind is circling. Her heart is trying to hold the connection while her body is asking her to stop. A woman in magnetism is gathered. Her energy is home. She is present in her body. She is connected to her intuition. She is rooted in her worth. She is open to love, but not desperate for proof. She is soft, but not endlessly accessible to what does not honor her. This is the energy that changes him. Because emotional overgiving may comfort him, but it does not always call him higher. It may give him a place to rest, but it may not ask him to become responsible. It may allow him to receive her warmth while avoiding his own clarity. It may make him feel wanted, but not necessarily require him to grow. Magnetic feminine energy is different. It does not pressure him, but it does not carry him either. It does not chase his potential, but it also does not deny what she feels. It does not punish his fear, but it refuses to build a home inside it. And this creates a sacred mirror. Her magnetism says, I am available for love, but not for emotional starvation. I am available for depth, but not for confusion. I am available for connection, but not for one-sided effort. I am available for truth, but not for hidden feelings that never become mature action. That is not cold. That is clear. And clarity is magnetic, because clarity removes the emotional noise. It removes the frantic need to be chosen. It removes the endless bargaining with reality. It removes the habit of mistaking effort for worthiness. It removes the belief that she must become more patient, more understanding, more available, more forgiving, and more spiritually aware just to make someone meet her halfway. She no longer asks, what else can I give so he finally sees me? She asks, what kind of love can actually meet me without requiring me to lose myself? That question changes everything. Because the magnetic feminine does not measure love by how much she can endure. She measures love by how deeply it can be met in truth. She knows that endurance is not the same as devotion. She knows that waiting in pain is not the same as divine timing. She knows that constantly explaining someone else's absence is not the same as unconditional love. She knows that true love does not require the feminine to become depleted in order for the masculine to remain comfortable. And when she knows that, she stops overgiving. She stops offering wife-level loyalty to someone offering inconsistent energy. She stops offering emotional intimacy to someone who only shows up when it is convenient. She stops offering forgiveness before accountability has arrived. She stops offering access to her heart without checking whether the space is safe enough for her softness. This does not make her less feminine. It makes her more feminine. Because true feminine energy is deeply receptive, but it is not careless with itself. It receives what is nourishing. It discerns what is draining. It opens where there is safety. It closes where there is repeated harm. It flows, but it also knows when to return to the source. That is why magnetic feminine energy is so powerful. It is fluid but not weak. Warm but not desperate. Loving but not self-abandoning. Open, but not available to every energy that wants to enter. And the divine masculine feels this. He feels that she is no longer giving from fear. He feels that her love is no longer wrapped in anxiety. He feels that she is not trying to pull him closer by draining herself. He feels that her warmth now comes from overflow, not from the panic of trying to keep him. That shift changes how he experiences her. When she was overgiving, he may have felt loved, but he may also have felt her need for him to respond. He may have felt the pressure of being responsible for her emotional state. He may have felt her effort reaching toward him, asking him to finally provide relief from the uncertainty. But when she becomes magnetic, her energy does not demand relief from him. It is already rooted. She can love and still breathe. She can miss him and still live. She can feel the bond and still choose peace. She can desire connection and still remain connected to herself. That kind of energy is unforgettable, because it does not try to possess. It simply exists in truth. And if he is ready, this awakens respect. He may begin to see that her love is not something he can receive casually. He may begin to understand that her softness is not endlessly available to passivity. He may begin to feel that if he wants to come close, he must come with more than vague longing. He must bring presence. Because magnetic feminine energy does not chase masculine presence. It attracts what is capable of meeting it, and it releases what is not. This is the part that many people misunderstand. Magnetism does not mean she sits there trying to energetically pull him back. Magnetism does not mean she uses silence as bait. Magnetism does not mean she becomes mysterious, so he becomes obsessed. That is still strategy. That is still performance. That is still attachment pretending to be power. True magnetism is not created for him. It is created by her relationship with herself. It is the result of her being nourished by her own life. It is the result of her trusting her own value. It is the result of her no longer treating love as something she has to earn through emotional labor. She becomes magnetic when she stops auditioning. She stops auditioning for his attention. She stops auditioning for his commitment. She stops auditioning for emotional clarity. She stops auditioning for the role of the woman who is finally chosen. Instead, she lives as the woman who has already chosen herself. That is the difference. Overgiving performs. Magnetism embodies. Overgiving says, "Look how much I can love." Magnetism says, "I am love, and I do not need to lose myself to prove it." Overgiving tries to be irreplaceable by doing everything. Magnetism becomes irreplaceable by being deeply herself. And this changes him because he can feel when she is no longer trying to earn his recognition. He may wonder why she feels different, why her energy is calmer, why she seems less available and yet more alive, why he feels drawn to her stillness more than he ever felt drawn to her chasing. Because overgiving can make a woman emotionally visible. But magnetism makes her spiritually undeniable. When she overgives, he may see her effort. When she is magnetic, he feels her essence. Her essence is no longer buried beneath anxiety. Her softness is no longer tangled with fear. Her love is no longer mixed with the silent question, "Will you choose me now?" She becomes clean energy. And clean energy is powerful. It does not push. It does not pull. It simply reveals. It reveals who can meet her. It reveals who only wants access. It reveals who is moved by her truth. It reveals who is triggered by her standards. It reveals who is ready for conscious love and who only liked her when she was easy to consume. That revelation is sacred. Because magnetic feminine energy does not only attract. It filters. It allows what is aligned to come closer, and it allows what is not aligned to fall away. It does not panic when something leaves because it understands that not everything that is drawn to her is capable of honoring her. That is maturity. Because the awakened feminine does not want to be wanted by everyone. She wants to be met by what is true. She no longer asks, "How do I make him want me?" She asks, "Can he meet me with truth, care, and emotional responsibility?" She no longer asks, "How do I stay on his mind?" She asks, "Am I staying in my own body?" She no longer asks, "How do I become unforgettable?" She asks, "Am I living in alignment with the woman I am becoming?" That is magnetism. And it changes everything. Because now, she is no longer trapped in the loop of proving. She is not trying to be the most patient, the most understanding, the most spiritual, the most forgiving, the most loyal, the most emotionally available. She is simply becoming true. And truth has its own gravity. The divine masculine feels that gravity. He may feel called toward it, but he may also feel confronted by it. Because her magnetism does not flatter his avoidance in the same way her overgiving did. It does not say, "Take your time while I keep abandoning myself." It does not say, "I will keep carrying the energy until you decide whether to participate." It does not say, "Your potential is enough for me to stay open forever." Instead, it says, "I honor what is real. I release what is not ready. I welcome love that can meet me. I do not chase love that asks me to disappear from myself." This energy may make him look at himself. He may begin to ask, was I only comfortable when she was overgiving? Did I mistake her emotional labor for love? Did I take more from her energy than I gave back? Did I call her standards difficult because I benefited from her having none? Did I miss her because I love her essence, or because I miss the way she fed my ego? These are deep questions. And if he allows them, they can mature him. Because magnetic feminine energy asks the masculine to become more conscious. It does not let him stay in the fantasy that love is simply something he receives. It shows him that love requires presence. It requires respect. It requires the ability to meet a woman who is no longer giving from depletion. If he wants her now, he must meet her fullness. And fullness cannot be manipulated with crumbs. Fullness cannot be held by inconsistency. Fullness cannot be satisfied by hidden feelings and no action. Fullness requires a man to become honest with himself. That is why her magnetism changes him forever if he is ready. It invites his higher masculine. Not his ego. Not his passivity. Not his need to be chased. His higher masculine. The part of him that wants to show up. The part of him that wants to protect what is sacred. The part of him that wants to lead with truth. The part of him that wants to become worthy of the love he once received too casually. But if he is not ready, her magnetism will still serve her. Because it will not collapse to keep him. That is the beauty. Magnetic feminine energy does not make itself smaller when someone cannot meet it. It does not return to overgiving because someone is uncomfortable with its boundaries. It does not lower its standards because someone misses the version of her that was easier to access. It remains. It keeps blooming. It keeps living. It keeps receiving what is aligned. It keeps releasing what is not. This is how she becomes free. Because the overgiving feminine is always trying to manage outcomes. The magnetic feminine trusts alignment. The overgiving feminine asks, "What can I do to keep him?" The magnetic feminine asks, "What truth must I live to keep myself?" And when she chooses the second question, she becomes unshakable. Not because she never hurts. She may hurt. She may grieve. She may miss him. She may feel the old impulse to give more when she feels distance. But she does not obey every impulse. She pauses. She breathes. She returns to her body. She asks whether the giving is coming from love or fear. And if it is coming from fear, she chooses herself. That is the practice. Magnetism is not a one-time state. It is a daily return. A return from anxiety to breath. From overthinking to embodiment. From proving to knowing. From chasing to receiving. From self-abandonment to self-trust. Every time she returns, her energy becomes stronger. And this strength is not hard. It is radiant. It is the strength of a woman who can remain open to love without letting love become an excuse to neglect herself. It is the strength of a woman who can say yes with her whole heart and no with her whole body. It is the strength of a woman who no longer confuses intensity with intimacy. This is the feminine energy that changes him forever. Because it is the energy of a woman who cannot be loved unconsciously anymore. If he approaches unconsciously, she feels it. If he offers crumbs, she does not build a feast from them. If he returns without responsibility, she does not mistake that return for transformation. If he speaks without consistency, she waits for reality to show itself. That is not punishment. It is discernment. And discernment is part of magnetism. Because magnetism without discernment becomes attraction without wisdom. It may draw people in, but it may also draw people who are not ready. People who want to feed on her light. People who enjoy her warmth but cannot honor her depth. The awakened feminine understands this. She does not only want to be magnetic. She wants to be discerning. She wants the love that comes close to be able to stay close with maturity. She wants the masculine who is drawn to her to also be capable of responsibility. She wants the connection to be not only intense, but safe. Not only spiritual, but embodied. Not only passionate, but consistent. That is why she stops overgiving. Because overgiving attracts people who need her to overfunction. Magnetism attracts what is aligned with her wholeness. And if something is not aligned, her magnetism will not chase it. It will let it reveal itself. This is a major shift. Before, she may have tried to make unaligned energy become aligned through more effort. She may have tried to love someone into readiness. She may have tried to explain emotional maturity to someone who was not practicing it. She may have tried to give enough warmth to make inconsistency become safety. But now she understands. My job is not to force alignment. My job is to embody it. That sentence can change her life. Because when she embodies alignment, she stops negotiating with things that require her to become less true. She stops saying yes when her body says no. She stops staying where her energy is being drained. She stops calling emotional hunger a soul connection. She becomes honest. And her honesty becomes the magnet. Not the hair. Not the mystery. Not the perfect words. Not the strategy. Not the silence designed to make him wonder. Her honesty. Her groundedness. Her fullness. Her self-trust. That is what changes him if he is ready. Because he may realize that the woman he once received from depletion is now radiating from wholeness. And a woman in wholeness cannot be approached casually. She cannot be kept in uncertainty. She cannot be held by hidden feelings alone. She cannot be convinced to abandon herself again by a little emotional warmth. He must come with truth. Or he cannot come close in the same way. That is the sacred boundary inside magnetism. It does not say, no one can enter. It says, only truth can enter. Only presence. Only respect. Only reciprocity. Only energy that honors what is being offered. This is why magnetic feminine energy feels peaceful. Because she is not trying to manage who comes and who goes. She trusts that her alignment will reveal it. If he is meant to rise, he will rise. If he is not, he will fall away from the version of her that no longer overgives. And either way, she remains with herself. That is the deepest power. Because emotional overgiving always fears the ending. Magnetic feminine energy trusts the revelation. Overgiving says, if I stop, I may lose him. Magnetism says, if I must overgive to keep him, I am already losing myself. Overgiving says, maybe one more effort will change everything. Magnetism says, what is meant for me will not require me to abandon my body, my peace, and my truth. Overgiving says, I cannot let go. Magnetism says, I can release what cannot meet me, because I am not releasing myself. That is liberation. And this liberation becomes visible. Not always dramatically, but in subtle ways. She stops rushing. She stops shrinking. She stops explaining the same truth repeatedly. She stops accepting emotional fog as a place to live. She stops giving immediate access to people who have not shown consistency. And she begins choosing what nourishes her. She chooses rest. She chooses beauty. She chooses friendships. She chooses purpose. She chooses movement. She chooses prayer. She chooses creativity. She chooses the kind of love that feels like peace in her body, not chaos in her nervous system. This is how her magnetism grows. It grows because she is no longer starved. It grows because she is feeding herself. Emotionally, spiritually, physically, creatively. And a nourished woman radiates differently from a depleted woman trying to be chosen. He feels that difference. He may not be able to name it, but he feels it. And that feeling may become the mirror that changes him. Because now he sees what feminine energy looks like when it belongs to itself. He sees that her love is not gone, but it is no longer desperate. Her softness is not gone, but it is no longer unguarded. Her warmth is not gone, but it is no longer poured into silence without discernment. She has become magnetic because she is no longer chasing. And that is the sacred truth of Chapter 9. The difference between magnetic feminine energy and emotional overgiving is the difference between fullness and fear. Emotional overgiving tries to earn love through effort, patience, explanation, and self-sacrifice. Magnetic feminine energy rests in worth, receives from life, protects softness with discernment, and allows only what is aligned to meet her. This is the shift that changes him forever. Because he can no longer receive her from depletion. He must meet her in fullness. He can no longer depend on her overgiving. He must respond to her self-respect. He can no longer enjoy her warmth without considering her worth. He must decide whether he is ready to honor the woman she has become. And if he is ready, her magnetism calls him into maturity. If he is not, her magnetism keeps her free. That is where Chapter 9 leaves us, with the understanding that true feminine magnetism is not about doing more, giving more, waiting longer, or proving deeper love. It is about becoming so rooted in yourself that love can finally meet you without you having to chase it. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 10, because next we bring everything together with the feminine energy that changes everything. The sacred moment she realizes the shift that changes him forever is the shift that brings her back to herself. Chapter 10. The feminine energy that changes everything. The feminine energy that changes him forever is not the energy that chases him. It is the energy that returns to herself. That is where the final chapter begins. Because throughout this journey, we have seen the shift. We have seen her stop chasing and start receiving. We have seen her stop explaining her worth. We have seen her become soft with boundaries. We have seen her silence become peaceful instead of wounded. We have seen her energy return to her body. We have seen her self-respect expose his avoidance. We have seen him realize she is no longer the same woman. We have seen how her shift awakens masculine responsibility. And we have seen the difference between emotional overgiving and true feminine magnetism. But now we bring it all together. The shift that changes him forever is the shift that changes her first. Because she does not become powerful by making him choose her. She becomes powerful when she stops waiting to be chosen before choosing herself. That is the sacred truth. For a long time, she may have believed her love needed to move toward him. She may have believed that if she gave enough, waited enough, understood enough, explained enough, forgave enough, and stayed soft enough, he would finally awaken. She may have believed her devotion could heal his fear. Her patience could soften his avoidance. Her presence could make him brave. And maybe her love did touch him. Maybe her softness reached places in him no one else had touched. Maybe her energy awakened something behind his mask. Maybe he did feel her in ways he could not explain. Maybe he did recognize that she was different. But even if all of that is true, there comes a moment when she realizes, my love may awaken something in him, but it cannot do his work for him. That realization changes everything. Because the feminine energy that changes him forever does not come from self-sacrifice. It comes from self-return. It comes when she stops pouring her life force into the question of whether he will become ready. It comes when she stops making his silence the center of her spiritual practice. It comes when she stops treating his potential as a place to live. It comes when she remembers that her body, her peace, her joy, her dreams, and her softness are sacred too. This is not the end of love. It is the purification of love. Because love mixed with fear becomes chasing. Love mixed with self-abandonment becomes overgiving. Love mixed with anxiety becomes obsession. Love mixed with low self-worth becomes waiting for someone else to confirm what the soul already knows. But love mixed with self-respect becomes magnetic. Love mixed with truth becomes clear. Love mixed with boundaries becomes safe. Love mixed with embodiment becomes powerful. That is the feminine energy that changes everything. She does not stop loving. She stops leaking. She stops leaking energy into silence. She stops leaking power into uncertainty. She stops leaking worth into someone else's unreadiness. She stops leaking her softness into places that have not learned how to protect it. And when she stops leaking, she starts radiating. That is the difference. A woman who leaks energy feels anxious, extended, depleted, and constantly searching for reassurance. She may love deeply, but her love is attached to fear. She may give generously, but underneath the giving is the silent question, will this make him choose me? But a woman who radiates is different. She is rooted. She is present. She is soft but not unguarded. She is open but not endlessly available. She is loving but no longer willing to abandon herself in the name of love. Her energy says, I am here. I am whole. I am willing to receive love. But I will not chase it. I will not beg for it. I will not shrink for it. I will not lose myself to prove that I deserve it. And that energy changes the field. Because now the divine masculine cannot meet her through the old pattern. He cannot depend on her to keep reaching. He cannot wait for her to explain his own feelings to him. He cannot count on her to keep translating his silence into hidden love. He cannot assume her softness will remain available without responsibility. She has changed. And because she has changed, the connection must change too. If he wants to meet her now, he must meet her differently. He must bring truth. He must bring presence. He must bring emotional maturity. He must bring the willingness to look at himself. He must bring the courage to stop hiding behind silence, confusion, or fear. Not because she demands it with force, but because her energy no longer supports anything less. This is the sacred power of the awakened feminine. She does not need to control the masculine. She simply stops participating in the version of the dynamic that allows him to remain unconscious. She stops carrying his part. She stops compensating for his absence. She stops making herself emotionally available to patterns that keep her nervous system in survival. And by doing that, she gives him back his responsibility. That responsibility may awaken him. He may begin to feel the space she no longer fills. He may begin to see what her overgiving once covered. He may begin to understand that her silence now is not punishment, but peace. He may begin to realize that the woman who once chased has become the woman who must be met. And that realization can change him forever. Because he may finally see that feminine love is not something to consume casually. It is not something to take for granted. It is not something to receive endlessly while offering uncertainty in return. It is not something that exists only to soothe his wounds, comfort his fear, and wait for his readiness. Feminine love is sacred. And sacred love requires sacred responsibility. If he is ready, this truth will humble him. He may ask himself, did I take her softness for granted? Did I rely on her emotional labor? Did I let her carry the connection while I stayed protected? Did I mistake her patience for permission to remain unavailable? Did I wait so long that she had to become someone new in order to survive my silence? These questions can become a doorway into honesty, a doorway into maturity, a doorway into masculine responsibility. Because now he is no longer only missing her. He is being invited to understand what kind of man he must become to meet the woman she has become. That is the difference between ego reaction and true awakening. Ego reaction says, I miss how she made me feel. Awakening says, I see what I failed to honor. Ego reaction says, I want her energy back. Awakening says, I must become safe enough to receive her energy with care. Ego reaction says, why did she change? Awakening asks, what did the old dynamic cost her, and how do I stop repeating it? That is the masculine invitation. But it is only an invitation. She cannot make him accept it. And this is where her deepest freedom begins. Because the awakened feminine does not make her peace dependent on whether he rises. She does not say, I will choose myself only if he finally awakens because of it. She says, I choose myself because I am worthy of my own devotion. She does not say, I will stop chasing so he comes back. She says, I stop chasing because my soul deserves to come back to me. She does not say, I will become magnetic so he regrets losing me. She says, I become magnetic because I am no longer abandoning my life force. This is true power. Power without manipulation. Love without self-betrayal. Softness without collapse. Detachment without cruelty. Boundaries without bitterness. And this is what makes her energy unforgettable. Because she is no longer trying to become unforgettable. She is simply becoming real. Real in her body. Real in her standards. Real in her silence. Real in her softness. Real in her choice to stop performing love for someone who is not meeting it with equal presence. And when a woman becomes real, the old dynamic cannot survive. The old dynamic needs her to doubt herself. The old dynamic needs her to over-explain. The old dynamic needs her to keep asking whether she is asking too much. The old dynamic needs her to keep choosing potential over reality. But the awakened feminine no longer lives there. She knows that needing clarity is not too much. She knows that wanting consistency is not too much. She knows that desiring emotional safety is not too much. She knows that asking for love to show up in reality, not only energy, is not too much. She knows that her softness deserves protection. And because she knows, she no longer bargains with confusion. This is the feminine energy that changes everything. It changes the way she loves. She still loves deeply, but she does not love from lack. She still understands, but she does not use understanding to excuse repeated harm. She still feels the bond, but she does not let the bond override her self-respect. She still has compassion, but compassion no longer comes at the price of her peace. And if he feels this shift, he may realize that the door has not necessarily closed. But the terms have changed. The old terms were: she chases, he retreats, she explains, he avoids, she carries, he delays, she waits, he decides. The new terms are: she stands in truth, he must meet truth, she protects her softness, he must become safe enough for it. She no longer chases. He must find his own courage. She chooses herself. He must decide whether he is ready to choose growth. That is a completely different connection. And if he cannot meet it, she does not collapse. She grieves if she needs to grieve. She releases if she needs to release. She keeps walking if she needs to walk. Because she understands that losing a connection is painful, but losing herself is no longer acceptable. That is the sacred maturity of the feminine. She no longer confuses suffering with devotion. She no longer confuses anxiety with intuition. She no longer confuses waiting with loyalty. She no longer confuses his potential with her destiny. She asks for reality, not fantasy, not hidden feelings, not spiritual signs without emotional responsibility. Reality. Can he communicate? Can he show up? Can he respect boundaries? Can he bring consistency? Can he meet her softness with care? Can he love in a way that feels safe in her body? These questions are not unspiritual. They are deeply spiritual. Because love must become embodied. Love must become lived. Love must become behavior. Love must become something that protects the heart, not only awakens longing. And this is where the feminine energy shift becomes complete. She stops chasing spiritual intensity and starts choosing embodied love. She stops worshiping potential and starts honoring presence. She stops waiting for the masculine to become conscious before she allows herself to live. She becomes conscious now. She becomes whole now. She becomes devoted to her own healing now. And this is why the shift changes him forever. Because whether he rises or not, he has encountered a woman who no longer loves from self-abandonment. He has felt the energy of a woman who can be tender and powerful at the same time. He has seen that feminine softness is not weakness. He has seen that a woman can love deeply and still walk away from imbalance. He has seen that the old version of her cannot be summoned back by the same energy that made her leave. That kind of realization leaves a mark, because it shows him what conscious feminine energy truly is. It is not chasing. It is not begging. It is not proving. It is not performing. It is not waiting in pain to be chosen. It is presence. It is self-respect. It is warmth with wisdom. It is softness with boundaries. It is love that includes the self. And if he is brave enough, it may call him into his own awakening. But here is the most important part. Her shift is not valuable because it changes him. Her shift is valuable because it frees her. That is the message. Because if she makes her transformation about his reaction, she is still chasing. If she measures her healing by whether he returns, she is still giving him the power to define her progress. If she becomes magnetic only to attract him, she is still centering him instead of herself. True feminine awakening is different. It says, I return to myself whether he notices or not. I embody my worth whether he validates it or not. I protect my peace whether he understands it or not. I open to love that can meet me, whether it comes through him or through a better aligned path. That is freedom. That is power. That is the feminine energy that changes everything. So let this final message land deeply. You do not need to chase what is meant to meet you. You do not need to explain your worth to someone committed to uncertainty. You do not need to give away your softness to prove that it is real. You do not need to wait in pain for someone else to become ready before you begin living. Your energy is sacred. Your heart is sacred. Your body is sacred. Your peace is sacred. And the love meant for you will not require you to abandon all of those things to receive it. If he rises, let him rise into truth. If he returns, let him return with responsibility. If he speaks, let his words be matched by consistency. If he loves, let that love be mature enough to protect the softness he once awakened. And if he does not rise, return to yourself anyway. Because you are not here to be consumed by waiting. You are here to be alive. You are here to radiate. You are here to receive. You are here to love from fullness, not fear. You are here to become the woman who no longer chases love because she has become deeply rooted in love within herself. That is the feminine energy that changes him forever. But more importantly, that is the feminine energy that changes you forever. If this message spoke to your heart, write in the comments, "I return to myself." Like this video if it brought you clarity. Subscribe to the channel for more divine feminine, divine masculine, soul connection, twin flame, and emotional awakening insights. And share this message with someone who needs to remember. The shift that changes everything begins the moment she stops abandoning herself.
Thank you for spending this moment with me. If this message resonated with your soul, remember to subscribe and continue this journey with us here on Twin Flame Journey. And always remember, what is meant for your soul will always find its way back to you. Until next time, beautiful soul, trust the journey.